This past few days, I've heard people also say that the U.S. Constitution said we were 3/5 of a human being. If you're referring to Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3 of the U.S. Constitution, that's not what that says. So we'll deal with that once again. We're going to revisit an interview I did in 2019 with Dr. Paul Finkelman. Dr. Paul Finkelman is a historian and the author of 50 books. He also wrote a book dealing with Thomas Jefferson, but he was speaking at the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History, and I interviewed him before he did before he spoke at the Charles H. Wright Museum, and we dealt with a lot of history. And you've heard me talk about the 3/5 Compromise of 1787 and how people totally misunderstand what it's saying, and it's dealing with it's dealing with apportionment. How do you determine how many seats in the House of Representatives slaveholding states will have? How do you count that enslaved population? Do you count the full population? Do you count 3/4 of the population? Finally, they decided to count 3/5 of the population. It's not saying they were 3/5 of a human being. It's total misunderstanding of history. And then at the very same time, the full population of free African Americans was counted. Okay, so we're going to deal with that as well, because I heard people this past, not as many saying that the Emancipation Proclamation freed the slaves, but I've heard a few times, including on MSNBC, people saying that the U.S. Constitution said we were 3/5 of a human being. No, it does not. It did not. No. So, I spent the past few days pulling my hair out. That's why I don't have any more hair, because I'm listening to this stuff. I'm like, oh my God. And then you have people who are saying that Juneteenth should be a national holiday. And my question is, why? So you can water it down like you did Dr. King Day? I'm not too quick to have other people join in our celebrations. I'm not. Now there's some legitimate, there are some legitimate arguments to making Juneteenth a federal holiday. There are also some legitimate arguments not to open it up. Because next thing you know, Macy's is going to have a Juneteenth Day sale, just like they have a Flag Day sale. Next thing you know, Hallmark is going to have Juneteenth Day cards if they have not already commoditized or monetized, I should say, Juneteenth. So, okay, what I say may go outside the circumference of other people's awareness. Just because you never heard it before, disagree with it, or don't like it, does not mean it's not true. Just means you have to do some research to understand what I'm talking about. I'm not too quick to bring white people into our stuff. I'm just to be perfectly honest with you. African Americans have been celebrating Juneteenth for 155 years in various forms to various degrees. Okay. We ain't just start celebrating this year when Donald Trump decided that he wanted to have his little rally in Tulsa, Oklahoma. That's a whole nother conversation right there. We'll talk a little bit about that little rally he had. Came up short. Okay. Always bragging about how big he is, and he couldn't perform last night. Wasn't that the same thing Stormy Daniels said? Not they said they had 1 million people that registered, and they said there were going to be 100,000 people, and about 6,200 showed up. Okay. All right. And then most of the people didn't have on masks, even though they gave out masks. There were protesters outside, Black Lives Matter protesters outside, things like this. NBCnews.com has an article, Trump furious about underwhelming crowd at Tulsa rally. He should be used to underperforming. 46 million people lost their jobs in 13 weeks. You've got over 100, what are we, 120,000 people, rather about 120,000 people have died from coronavirus. In about 3 months ago, he said it's just going to all go away very soon. It's just going to all wash away. You remember back in, I think it was February, he said we're at 15 cases. Pretty soon it's going to be 0. I told you there's going to be a 0 on the number, but it's not going to be anywhere near 0. We're at about 120,000 cases, 120,000 deaths, I should say. And then if you look at, because I follow this information daily, How's everybody doing? Everybody share this broadcast on your Facebook page and your YouTube channel, and your YouTube on Facebook and YouTube. We're broadcasting on our Facebook fan page, The African History Network, The African History Network, and my YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, Imhotep. So I follow this information daily. So now we're seeing huge spikes in about 22 states in coronavirus cases, and we're seeing states set records for new coronavirus cases. But all this stuff was supposed to just go away, just disappear. You know, so once again, this is what happens when you have incompetent leadership, right? This is what happens when you have incompetent leadership in the White House. White House says it's preparing for a possible fall wave as cases rise in 18 states. When we look at the reporting from New York Times has live updates. We posted about this on our Facebook fan page, The African History Network, my personal page, Michael Imhotep. New daily cases have hit records in 12 states, and the White House acknowledges preparing for a fall wave. But what the White House is saying is different, largely than what Donald Trump is saying. We see that nationwide cases have risen 15% over the last 2 weeks. Cases are rising in 18 states across the South, the West, and the Midwest. 7 states hit single-day case records on Saturday, and on Saturday, June 20th, and 5 other states hit a record earlier in the week. We see the state of California reported 4,515 new cases on Sunday, June 21st, setting a record for the highest daily increase in the number of infections since the pandemic began in March. We look at on Sunday, June 21st as well, the state of Missouri reported 397 new cases, and the state of Oklahoma reported 478 new cases. And we know that these were both records. These were both records for new cases in these respective states. We see across the United States, the number of new infections has steadily risen during the past 5 days after plateauing for the previous 80 days. At the same time, overall deaths have dropped dramatically. The 14-day average was down 42% on Saturday. But we're seeing a spike in cases, which could very well lead to an increase in deaths. At the same time, the Trump administration, specifically Donald Trump, has stopped the daily coronavirus task force daily briefings, as if somehow they're declaring victories, if somehow they defeated coronavirus. So this is an example of how elections have consequences. We saw earlier in the week, Thursday, the numbers came out, and ABC News reported on this, as well as NBC and all the media outlets. 1.5 million more U.S. workers filed for unemployment insurance. 1.5 million more workers filed for unemployment insurance the previous week, bringing the total to about 46 million people who have filed for unemployment in the past 13 weeks. Millions of those people have also lost their health insurance. It's estimated that 45 to 50% of African-American owned businesses are not going to survive the coronavirus economy. So if you go back a few weeks ago, and I told you that when Donald Trump asked African-Americans, what the hell do you have to lose? The correct answer was everything. The correct answer was everything. This is exactly what I'm talking about. So we're going to deal with some of that on tonight's show. And then we'll talk some about the Emancipation Proclamation and dispel myths about that. No, it did not free enslaved Africans. We'll be joined by Dr. Leonard Jeffries as well in a few minutes. Also, this past week, Aunt Jemima brand, the Aunt Jemima brand. Who has not had Aunt Jemima pancakes? Probably, many people, not just African Americans. But the Aunt Jemima brand is going to change the name and remove the stereotypical image of Aunt Jemima. Now, we know back in 1989, they gave Aunt Jemima a perm and a string of pearls, but it was originally a very stereotypical representation of African-American woman who was originally depicted, originally a slave, depicted as a slave. It's a fictitious person. Now they got real life people to portray this fictitious person, just like they got Sean Connery and Daniel Craig to portray James Bond. Okay. And, talk about the power of imagery. You have some African-Americans who are upset that they're going to get rid of Aunt Jemima. Aunt Jemima is not real. It's not a real person. Okay. And it was originally a stereotypical depiction of a former slave is promoting that mammy image. But you have some people just invested and associated with this image. Now, speaking of images, we see a continuation of protests taking place all across the country, dealing with against police brutality and dealing with reducing the responsibility of police officers and reallocating resources. Some call it defund the police. I call it reduce responsibilities, reallocate resources, because defund the police is playing right into Donald Trump's hand, who is running on the platform of law and order and says he's the law and order president. But we saw Confederate monuments continue to be taken down and continue to be torn down this past week, and statues of Cecil Rhodes and things like this, right? But it's clear that many people need a history lesson, because in I think it was Florida, you had protesters who tore down a statue of Ulysses S. Grant. Ulysses S. Grant was the Union general. He was the general of the Union Army, who was fighting against the Confederacy. The Union was fighting to defeat the Confederacy. The Confederacy wanted to maintain slavery. They tore down a statue of him because they said because he owned one slave. Yeah, but he freed the slave in 1859. He then goes on to become the Union general to fight against the Confederacy, and then he supports the rights of the freedmen, the newly freed slaves, when he becomes the 18th president. They tore down his statue. It's very clear that some people need a history lesson. And as I said before, and I know we're coming up here on the break, how much time we have before the break, JT? As I've said before, I'm against all the Confederate statues being, they should be all taken down and put in museums. They should not be torn down by protesters. They should be taken down properly and put in museums. All right, we have to go to break. Hey, you listen to the African History Network show right here on 910 AM, the Superstation, the Future Radio. I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. We'll be back in a few minutes.
Are you getting the most out of your message?
All right, stand by, everybody. We're on commercial break. How's everybody doing? We have Dr. Leonard Jeffries coming up here in a few minutes. Everybody share this broadcast on your Facebook and YouTube. Invite your friends to tune in. Give me a minute here. I've got to send this email out. How's everybody doing? We have Pamela, we have Jenny, Teresa. You know, this is a crazy week. I mean, so much going on. You got Donald Trump with his little rally in Tulsa, Oklahoma. African Americans in Tulsa pissed that he came. Now, personally, you know how I felt. I said, let those dumbasses go up in there and get coronavirus. That's how I felt. You know, I understand the protesters, but no, come on, no, go on up in there. You know. So I'm like, why you? I know Tulsa has a large increase in the number of coronavirus cases, but you know, hey, chicken's about to come home to roost. I say let the Donald Trump supporters go up in there, get coronavirus, and take it back where the hell they came from. You know, but you know, everybody doesn't think like me, so okay. But we're on commercial break. Hey, we'll be back in a couple minutes. You got Pamela, James, John. How you doing, John Hotep? Jolene, and I can understand the doctors. The doctors are trying to save lives, regardless of political affiliation. I'm not against people who are Republicans. I'm against stupid ass white supremacist Republicans. Okay, I'm against stupid ass white supremacist Democrats. Just so happens that it's more likely that white supremacists are going to be Republicans than Democrats in general. You have some exceptions. All right. So we're back from commercial break. Hey, welcome back to the African History Network show right here on 910 AM, the Superstation Future Radio. I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. It is Sunday, June 21st, 2020. It is the winter solstice. This is officially marks the first day of summer. And even though it's the first day of summer, I'm telling y'all right now, you still need to wear your masks, your facial coverings, get like a KN95 mask, get a surgical mask. I'm telling you, you were going to see an increase in cases here in the state of Michigan, especially Detroit, because I'm looking at people who think this is all over with and they're playing games. And it's like, no, if you study, and I did a whole broadcast dealing with the Spanish flu pandemic of 1918, which continued into 1919, it hit in 3 waves. That second wave in the winter of 1918 was worse than the first wave. Okay, we're seeing huge increases in 22 states, and we're still in the first wave of coronavirus. A lot of these states opened back up too soon. As I said was going to happen, a lot of these states opened up back too soon. And you had a lot of these Republican states who wanted to do Donald Trump's bidding. And we're seeing what's taking place. Okay. Check out NBCnews.com. Check out the live. Check out the live updates they have done with coronavirus at NBCnews.com, as well as New York Times. New York Times has good updates. I'm looking at right now, coronavirus live updates. White House says it's preparing for a possible fall wave as cases rise in 18 states. A possible fall wave? Yeah, it's basically inevitable that there will be a fall wave. Okay. And we're not out of the first wave yet either. All right, so we're going to deal with those topics and some others. We have a update dealing with the Rayshard Brooks killing. The 2 officers involved there have been charged and arrested. And I saw interviews with the DA, Paul Howard Jr., who methodically laid out the case against the officers. And we'll talk a little bit about Donald Trump's rally in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And there were a bunch of lies that he told, as usual. What's a Donald Trump rally without lies, right? There was some fact checking on these lies that he told from New York Times. So we'll give you some of that, some information dealing with that. And then also, let me see, what was that Ulysses S. Grant statue? I think it was, hold on, San Francisco. It was San Francisco, not Florida. Sorry, Florida. Okay, Florida, you responsible for some stupid ass stuff. Look at the governor that you have right now, Governor Ron DeSantis. But we can't blame this on Florida. We can blame some other stuff on Florida. You know, Trayvon Martin. We can blame some other stuff on Florida, but not this right here. This was San Francisco. All right, San Francisco protesters tear down statue of Union General Ulysses S. Grant. This is from Newsweek.com, June 20th, 2020. Yeah, it's very clear. Some people need a history lesson, but you've heard me say before, Americans are woefully ignorant of history. And just the fact that you have so many Americans, including Bunker Boy, little Bunker Boy, Donald Trump, including him, who want to hold on to Confederate monuments, 1. 2, you have 10 army bases, military bases, named after Confederate generals, so-called Confederate heroes, things like this. Okay, he doesn't want to change the names of them. The Confederacy and the Confederate soldiers and the generals, these were traitors to the Union. They committed treason based upon Article 3, Section 3 of the U.S. Constitution. They took up arms against the Union, seceded from the Union, separated from the Union, set up their own government because they wanted to maintain slavery. Nations don't have statues and monuments and things like this to traitors to the Union. Okay, when you go to Germany, they don't have statues and buildings and schools named after Adolf Hitler or named after the Nazis. Nations don't do that. Okay, that's how backwards and how ignorant people are of history in this country. Okay, this is why you hear me talk about this study here from the Southern Poverty Law Center, Teaching Hard History, American Slavery, Teaching Hard History, American Slavery. This is why this is so important. Okay, and you can download this from splcenter.org, Southern Poverty Law Center. And what they did was it was a survey of high school seniors, 1,000 high school seniors all across the country. And they found out how very little they knew about the history of slavery, why the Civil War was fought, etc. And then our next guest is the uncle to one of the people who were really involved with this, and that's Dr. Kwame Hassan Jeffries. And Dr. Kwame Hassan Jeffries was on the committee who put together this study as well. Okay, we have Dr. Leonard Jeffries coming up here in just a minute, but download this from splcenter.org, splcenter.org, Southern Poverty Law Center, Teaching Hard History, American Slavery. All right. So on the African History Network show, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world, because right now it's correct wrong behavior. What you do for yourself, what you do to yourself, and what you allow other people to do to you and get away with is based upon what you think about yourself. What you think about yourself is based upon what you have been taught about yourself. What you've been taught about yourself is based upon everything you've read, heard, and seen about yourself. So when you control the radius of a man's thoughts, you can control the circumference of his actions, because the mind can't do or teach what it doesn't know. Now, we deal with a number of different topics here on the show. We deal with current events and history and politics, education, economic empowerment, entrepreneurship, relationships, love, sex, health issues, and much, much more. Sign up for our email newsletter. Text the word Kemet, K-E-M-E-T. Text the word Kemet, K-E-M-E-T, to 22828 to sign up for our email newsletter. Also, visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. And right on the homepage has the link to sign up for the email newsletter as well, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Okay. Let's do this right quick. JT, I'm calling in on another line. Pick up, okay? All right, JT, you got me? All right, JT, this is Michael Imhotep again. Okay, I had to switch lines. Can you hear me? JT, can you hear me?
Yeah, you're on the air.
Okay, good. Okay, this should be a clearer line also. Okay. Do we have Dr. Leonard Jeffries on the line?
Good.
Hello? Do we have Dr. Leonard Jeffries on the line?
Yes, you do.
Okay.
Hold on one second.
Okay. All right. So on the line, we have Dr. Leonard Jeffries. He's one of our great Grandmaster Scholar Warriors. You've heard him on the African History Network show a number of times. He's one of my teachers. I've known him for years. He's in documentaries like 1804, The Hidden History of Haiti. He's also in a new documentary from director Tyke Grant. And this deals with, the name of this documentary is Hapi, the role of economics on the development of civilization, the role of economics on the development of civilization. Also in the documentary are Professor James Small, another one of my teachers, Dr. Wade Nobles, Dr. Patricia Newton, Dr. Julia Malveaux, and Dr. Boyce Watkins. We have Dr. J.
Yes, brother. How you doing?
All right. Hotep, Dr. Leonard Jeffries, how you doing tonight, brother?
Well, it appears that every day above ground is a good day. So I'm glad to be here.
Right.
I'm heading into my 84th year.
Yes.
So January 19th will be my 84th birthday. So I'm glad to be counted among those continuing to bring off the African truth so we can use it as empowerment, so we can develop the African mind and heart and consciousness, so we can move with power through this chaotic and confused world.
Well, brother,
so that,
go ahead.
No, I say I'm doing fine. I can't complain. I come from a foundation that involved the Dr. Benz and the Dr. Clarks and the Dr. Kent Williams as my elders, and then the Dr. Asa Hayes, the Dr. Naim Akbar, the Dr. Wade Nobles, the Dr. Jacob Carruthers, and the whole host of sisters like Dr. Francis Chris Rosing that were my partners.
Right.
And of course, I've been blessed to have a 55-plus year partnership with Dr. Roslyn Jeffries, so that we've been in this thing in terms of unveiling the African truth. And it has been a magnificent march through history. Dr. Clark, they called it, when Wesley Snipes financed Sinclair Bond doing a story of Dr. Clark, they came up with a film called A Great and Mighty Walk.
Right.
And Dr. Clark had a great and mighty walk, and he was really one of those people that we have to revere and give thanks that we were with him all these years. There are generations that you're involved in, a walk ain't going to do it. We have to have a superhighway into the future. So we need those of you to master these technologies, and so we can put this enormous African truth into the stratosphere. Because it's one thing to have the technology, it's another thing to have the knowledge that needs to be a part of the technological consciousness. And so we're dependent upon you and others in your generation to be able to make your contribution. I've been blessed to have these brothers, two sons, Dr. Hassan, Kwame Jeffries, and his brother, Dr. Hakeem Sekou Jeffries, doing his work in the political arena, and they're raising his two boys magnificently. And Hassan is doing his work in the historical realm, and I'm looking at three of his angels that he has, three little girls that are the most wonderful of people on the planet. And so he's got this enormous responsibility in terms of scholarship, in terms of taking care of business day to day. And that project that he is one of the key people involved, the 16th, 19th project, dealing with 400 years of putting the history correct. And that's our great responsibility. Black lives matter, but they don't matter as much as they could and should if we don't have the serious information.
Right.
It's good walk through streets and protesting, but you have to have an objective. And if you have an end of your protest, then it will be more meaningful. But if you are just protesting to be a part of more of the same and to integrate in the insanity of it all, then our mission is not going to be what it should be. We should be willing to move the system of white supremacy out of the dominant place it has in our socialization, in our acculturation. Socialization is how you get your beliefs, your values, your things that matter in your life. And acculturation is how you fit into society. We do not need to or should not need to fit into a slave-dominated society, a society that is perpetuating white supremacy and white insanity. Right. So we need an out. And so we need to get this African knowledge and knowledge about people since the beginning of time to find a pathway, a super highway to a real renaissance and development. So I know that you're doing some great work. I want to push you even further. So as we get closer, I will make some demands upon you, because you just can't sit back satisfied with the level that you've reached. You have the ability to be in a transition between the elders and the brothers and sisters that have put these institutions and organizations in place, and you need to get your crew together and take it even further.
Right. I agree with that. Now, the reason why people watching on social media, the reason why I've had a huge smile on my face even before you said that was because if you pay attention, all I asked Dr. Jeffries is, how are you doing tonight? And so this is how Dr. J teaches, right? So
don't ask me about Imhotep and the Nile Valley, because we'll be here all night.
Exactly. All right. So, and I interviewed Dr. Leonard Jeffries numerous times back on my Blog Talk Radio days on the African History Network show when it was on Blog Talk Radio. All right. So, Dr. J, we're dealing with time constraints here on this network, but tell us about the movie Hapi, the role of economics on the development of civilization. This is a fantastic movie, and you're featured in it.
Yeah, it's more than a movie. Mm-hmm. It's the beginning and the opening up of a process to move us higher and higher. It's a part of a film component of a movement of moving us seriously into our Africanness that we've been running away from. And it's quite clear if we want to integrate into an integrated house that has us as its doormat, if we want to integrate into a house that Minister Farrakhan says is burning, then we can't stop from doing that way. But we need to create our own method and our own approach to where we want to go. And if some other folks want to join us, yes. So we're not going to get caught up into worshiping white folks,
right,
and their system of domination, destruction, and death. And so the film captures our tradition in the sense of stolen legacy. That's George G.M. James in the 1950s. He said that the legacy that we worship in college and in the European educational system, worshiping the Greeks as the founders of philosophy and history and everything, mathematics, architecture, that's a myth. And he points out that there's a stolen legacy that is clear there. And since he did his work in 1954, a great brother called Dr. Sheikh Anta was doing his work on the French side. And then in 1954, thereabout, you had people in the Caribbean side, Frantz Fanon and others talking about the psychology of the mind. And then you had people who took the lead in establishing what we refer to as negritude. That's Aimé Césaire coming from Martinique, one of the French colonials. And then you had coming out of South America, the Guyanas, you had this a brother who was extraordinary. He was my generation, and that's Walter Rodney. His great work was Slavery in the Upper Guinea Coast. That was his PhD. But he went on to get that PhD, serious intellectual.
Hey, Doc, we're getting some background noise.
One of my neighbors.
Okay.
So that must be every night he greets us with telling us he's going home. But you have Walter Rodney. But out of the Guyanas, which he came out of, you had before him George Padmore. And he wrote a great book, Pan-Africanism or Communism. And he was a part of the 1945 conference on Pan-Africanism that they had in Manchester, England. So you can take a date and you can take a person and an individual and his contribution, but then you need to connect it with a whole movement.
Right.
So this film phenomena will be part of a movement. It's not going to be a film, and there's not going to be no Hollywood deciding whether it's a value or not. There's not going to be no Oscars. It's going to be given the African Oscar. We're going to come up with the Imhotep Oscar, the multi-dimensional genius.
Right.
And so this helps initiate a process that's been going on for some time. It's nothing new. Dr. Ben, who gave us the Nile Valley, nothing new. Dr. Clark, who gave us African Pan-Africanism, nothing new. Dr. Asa Hilliard, who said we got to put the knowledge in the curriculum. Naim Alpar and the Eight Nobles, they said we got to deal with the mind. Francis Cress Welsing said we got to struggle by all means necessary. And so this is a continuation. It's pulling the family together and passing it on to the generations to come. And that's where you play a particular role of appreciating the elders and the associates with the elders. And then a book I have in my hand, which you definitely would know how to promote. It's a complementary of this movement of Renaissance and African renewal. It's Africans at the crossroads, and God knows we're at the crossroads.
Right.
And the book is entitled Notes for an African World Revolution. And so Dr. Clark, my mentor, deals with the unfinished revolution of Nkrumah, the unfinished revolution of Lumumba, the unfinished revolution of Marcus Messiah Garvey, the unfinished revolution of Al-Haj Malik, El-Shabazz, Malcolm X, the unfinished revolution in Kenya, Tom Mboya and Jomo Kenyatta. And so we have to understand that we're part of a historical movement to restore our ourselves, and the key restoration is to appreciate economics as the foundation of living. Economics is complemented by politics, and that's why I created the equilateral triangle, and I called it triangle pyramid analysis.
Yep, the pyramid principle. Mm-hmm.
You can take a particular historical incident, but you can't go deep with it unless you understand what are the economic factors. Economics is your creative, productive capability, and everything, in order to survive and live, has to be creative and productive. Right. And that refers to the laws of nature and the human family as well. But your economics and your politics, your economics cannot work unless your politics is linked to it.
Correct.
Economics can be part of the foundation, but politics is the management and the administrative capability. So the way we learn in the European individualized way of dividing things up, you learn politics in one corner of the university, in one building, you learn economics in another corner of the building, and with another process, psychology in another corner. We are now looking at a process of putting these great learning processes together as part of a movement for the African world future.
Exactly.
And so I'm sure that these brothers have taken the initiative and showed us what can be done. And it's up to us to, pass the ball on to other generations and other brothers and sisters. Right. Dr. Clark and all of them wanted to make sure we put the sisters in the middle of all that we do.
Exactly. Well, because you're one of my teachers as well as Professor James Small, when you all teach, you talk about the pyramid principle. And when I teach, I actually show people the pyramid of Khafre. And a pyramid has three sides. At the foundation is African history and culture. It gives us our VIPs, our values, our interests, and our principles. And then that influences. Yeah, that influences what I call our economic empowerment, which is one side, our economics, or what I term our economic empowerment. And then the other side of the pyramid is our politics or our political empowerment. And so we have to have a synthesis of all three of these. Unfortunately, some of our people just want to deal with the economics and they just want to deal with the stock market and things like this, but don't have the African Center Foundation.
That's not enough.
Right. And then you have some people who want to deal with the African Center Foundation and speak metal netter and things like this, but don't want to deal with economics and politics. OK, so explain. Go ahead.
Mention at the top of that pyramid, and what I call the capstone, is culture. Mm-hmm. Culture is the key because it tells you what type of economics to develop and who to do your politics with.
Correct.
And so you don't want to create a myth about culture. Culture is a part of the process. Where some of our people say, I ain't worried about no politics and I ain't trying to make no whole lot of money, but I got to express my cultural genius. Well, that's cool, but link it up to these other dimensions so we can have a real movement that speaks to economics, politics, and culture. That's why they wanted to talk about development, but not just economic development, but link the economic development. And then go to the top of the pyramid, to the pyramids on Giza, and you have the capstone.
Right.
And so I use this to talk about the caps, concepts. All knowledge is grouped into a certain formulation. Analysis, all knowledge has to be seen in terms of an analytical dimension. And then P for processes, all knowledge involves various processes. And S for systems, all knowledge is linked together in terms of systems. And those mysteries have to be broken down so that you can use it to empower yourself. Knowledge is power, and African knowledge is African empowerment.
Right.
If an African has been impregnated with European knowledge, he's may produce a monster.
Mm-hmm.
But if he has his relationship with the African knowledge, he should produce a manifestation of the creative force of the universe and the unseen powers that be, that we refer to as God or Goddess.
Right, exactly.
History.
Right. Well, now we're coming up on a break here in about 6 minutes. People can visit the website hapifilm.com, HAPI, hapifilm.com. You can get information about the official premiere of the film, which is July 18th, 2020, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time online. You will be able to digitally download the film at the end of the premiere. And there will be other times when the film will be shown. Also, they have all that information at the website, hapifilm.com. The film features Dr. Leonard Jeffries, who we're speaking with right now, Professor James Small, Dr. Wade Nobles, Dr. Patricia Newton, Dr. Julia Malveaux, Dr. Boyce Watkins, and others. Tyke Grant was trying to get me in the film. We were trying to connect because he told me about this film about a year and a half ago, and we can never get together to film me for it, but they have me on the media team to help promote this film. Okay, so we're coming up here on the break. How much time do you have, Doc? Can you stay for about 15 more minutes or so?
Yes, brother, I certainly can.
Okay, so let me ask you this: as it ties into this film, how does this film relate to us today? And the reason why I say that is because we see mass protests all across the country. Many African Americans are calling attention and want the economic inequities, healthcare inequities, things like this addressed that are taking place that are historical. How does this film relate to what's going on today, and how will this film help us?
Well, that's the beauty of the film. In another period of time, the film may not have had the impact that it has now, and the need. Dr. Amos Wilson brilliantly pulled together a blueprint for Black Power in the period of our earlier struggle. But now we're in a much larger struggle for the African mind, M-I-N-E, the African wealth, and you cannot control the African mind, M-I-N-E, unless you have control over the African mind, M-I-N-D.
Right.
So this play on words is very real. The European, the Asian, and others have put in place a culture that has stripped the Africa of its wealth, the mines, the gold mines, the diamond mines, the uranium mines. And so we have to be in a struggle to make sure we restore and keep as much of our material wealth as we need to. And we have to get rid of that mind that the European has imposed upon us. So we are doing his bidding, and we want to integrate with him and discard our struggles coming out of Africa in various historical periods, and our attempt to produce a new African man and woman, and our attempt to now produce a new African worldview. And so that's why this film is more than anything that we've had like it, and there will be spin-offs that will allow people in their particular center of interest to focus on things. But you've got to relate knowledge to its deeper dimensions and not just have it hanging out there around one or two insignificant things. I call that a paralysis of analysis.
Right.
Because when you deal with economics, you got to deal with ecology of the environment that you're in. That's why the Happy Valley, the Nile Valley, was so successful, because the Creator had this flood in the Nile that created a floodplain that was ready for development, but you had to use the genius of the African in order to make it work. And so the economics relates to ecology like politics relates to sociology. Mm-hmm. And so the African finds a political system of rulership, people who could control the wealth and properly distribute it among the people. And so that these sciences that the Europeans say come out of the Greek and Roman experience actually have deep and deeper meaning in the African experience. And at the summit of the pyramid analysis, of course, is culture. Culture is the key, and culture is more than dancing and drumming. Culture are the deep values, deep thoughts, deep ideas, mind development, psychology, the development of the mind is manifested in its highest forms through culture. And other people trying to put together their shattered culture, borrow from us and pull together what they can to deal with their shattered culture. And then they proceed to dismiss us as not a part of the human family.
Mm-hmm.
And that's too much the history of the European and the Asian, and unfortunately the Arab. And so we have to straighten out the flow of human history so that these other folks get it right as best they can. And if they can't, then we keep moving on and make sure we do what we have to do for ourselves and others who wish to have the truth, that we are the chosen. We've been chosen to be the firstest with the mostest on the planet. And it's manifested in our great building for eternity and our philosophical ideas. The Greeks did not go north to look for culture and knowledge. They went south into the valleys and the river valleys of the Nile and southern Asia to see the work of the Creator passed down through the human family. And so we are trained to look toward the north and look toward the European, when the European is a Johnny-come-lately on the world stage.
Right.
Check
Right.
out the DF Civilization and Barbarism details that as the Bible, as far as I'm concerned, in terms of the knowledge and the flow of human history. And he was a brilliant multi-genius. And so he is the Imhotep of modern times in the sense that he was a scientist, a physicist, a linguist. He had political science, and he believed in the importance of
Those fireworks in the background. Okay. Yeah. Go ahead.
That's what we got to deal with. That's where our energy and the genius of somebody, and you can see the sparks. I'm worried about whether the sparks might come over here
Right.
and burn down my place, but that's all right.
Hey, hold it right there, Doc. I know we're coming up on the break here. Hey, JT, how much time we have before the break, JT?
2 minutes.
2 minutes before the break. Okay. All right. Go ahead, Doc. You're talking about the fireworks, and you're talking about Dr. Schenk out the joke.
I'm saying check out the gift is singularly one of our greatest minds, but he did not produce himself. In fact, he pays great homage to his mentor, Leonard Jeffries. And I met Leonard Jeffries before I met Shekanta. Charles, give me the book. And I want to pay respect to the process of knowledge that I got involved in. I met Leonard Jeffries, who set up Presence Africaine, which was the bookstore, library, cultural center that the African scholars went to. And Dr. Leonard Jeffries and his wife shepherded this center for a long time. So Shekanta, appreciating the support he got from his elder and his elder's partner, he dedicated this enormous work, Civilization and Barbarism, to Leonard. And so I'm reading the dedication. I dedicate this book to the memory of Leonard Jeffries, who died on the battlefield of African culture. Now, this is an African scientist, linguist, and nuclear genius, and he's talking about the battlefield of African culture.
Mm-hmm.
Leonard, who you knew what you came to do on this earth, a life entirely dedicated to others, nothing for yourself, everything for others, a heart filled with goodness and generosity, a soul steeped in nobility, a spirit always serene, simplicity personified, exclamation point. Did emerge, one to provide us with an example, an ideal of perfection by calling you into existence, question mark. Alas, the terrestrial community to which you knew how to convey better than anyone else the message of human truthfulness that sprang from the innermost depths of your being was deprived of you too soon. But the remembrance of you will never be erased from the memory of African peoples to whom you dedicated your life. That is why I am dedicating this book to your memory in witness of a brotherly friendship that is stronger than time. And that's our motto.
Right. Now, what was the name of that book again?
Say that again, my brother.
What was the name of that book again that you're reading from?
This is the great work. This is the victory Civilization or Barbarism.
Okay.
And it's subtitled an Authentic Anthropology. And it's by the great African genius, Sheikh, Cheikh, Anta, middle name, Anta, family name, Diop, Diop. And the various schools that our people like him have developed is what we need to tap into and prepare this plate of greatness to our young people and our generations behind us to get them enmeshed in it and nurtured in it and baptized in it and nourished in this knowledge. This is the food for thought. This is the food that will expand their consciousness. And so we don't limit it to one individual or one period of time or one nation. It's a collectivity of African spirits and forces coming together that's going to prepare our people for the future.
Okay.
Let me leave you with this.
Well, hold it right there. We got to take a commercial break. We got to take a commercial. Can you finish that on the other side of the break? Just hold it right there. Okay, you listen to the African History Network show right here on 910 AM, the Superstation of Future Radio. I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. We'll be back in a few minutes. We're speaking with Dr. Leonard Jeffries.
Have you been denied credit or hit with high interest rates? A low credit score happens to many of us, and millions of people are victims of incorrect items on their credit reports and don't even know it. That's why you need credit repair.
Stand by, everybody. Stand by. One commercial break. You listen to the African History Network show right here on 910 AM, the Superstation, the Future Radio. Your host, Brother Michael Imhotep, was speaking with Dr. Leonard Jeffries. We'll be back in a few minutes here. We're broadcasting on our Facebook fan page, The African History Network, The African History Network, and my YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, Imhotep. How's everybody doing? If you like this type of information, also, you can donate to the African History Network, $ the AHN show through Cash App, $ the AHN show through Cash App, or through YouTube, paypal.me/the AHN show, paypal.me/the AHN show. Okay. Okay, so when I interviewed Dr. J, I got to cut him off because Dr. J would just go, and when I used to do Blog Talk Radio, I control commercial breaks here on 910 AM. I don't control commercial breaks because it's not my radio station. Okay, so hey, I want to let you all know that two of my most popular lectures are available right now at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. The 3-hour presentation I did dealing with the history of Juneteenth. I did this June 11th, 2019, Juneteenth history, Emancipation Day, but not Independence Day. We never got our 40 acres and a mule. Dr. King's Poor People's Campaign, we're coming to get our check. Okay, this is available right now at AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. And then also, the 2.5-hour lecture I did dealing with the history of Black Wall Street. I did this in 2014 in Seattle, Washington. Black Wall Street, from destruction to the resurrection of economic empowerment. And I deal with a timeline of history leading up to the attack in 1921. I deal with some of the origins of Black Wall Street and how Tulsa, Oklahoma was founded by Creek Indians right around 1834, 1836. And they get pushed off their land in southeastern United States because of the Indian Removal Act of 1830. And they go out west on the Trail of Tears and take their African slaves with them into what became Tulsa, Oklahoma. And Tulsa comes from the Creek Indian word Talasi. So I deal with that whole history. And I deal with the history of Black Wall Street and also the attack June 1st, 1921, 15,000 white people invade North Tulsa, where the African Americans lived. And the business district was the Greenwood district. The intersection, the beginning of the business district was the intersection of Greenwood, Archer, and Pine. This is where the Gap Band gets their name from, Gap, G-A-P, and because they're from Tulsa, Oklahoma. And then I also deal with the fact I built Black Wall Street after the race riot, after the massacre as well. Okay. So that's available right now at AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Welcome back to the African History Network show right here on 910 AM, the Superstation of Future Radio. Hey, I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. It is Sunday, June 21st, 2020. It's the summer solstice, the first day of summer. And we're speaking to one of my teachers, one of our Grandmaster Scholar Warriors, Dr. Leonard Jeffries. And during the break, I was letting people on social media know that my 2 lectures that I've done dealing with the history of Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma, Black Wall Street from destruction to the resurrection Resurrection of Economic Empowerment. Is available at my website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. We have it on DVD and digital download. And then also my 3-hour presentation dealing with the history of Juneteenth, separating fact from fiction, Juneteenth history, Emancipation Day, but not Independence Day. We never got out 40 acres and a mule. Dr. King's Poor People's Campaign. We're coming to get our check. That's also available at AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. All right. So we've got Dr. Leonard Jeffries back with us. Okay, Dr. J, right before the break, you were you were quoting from the book by Dr. Shankat Diop, Civilization of Barbarism. And we're also talking about the new documentary, Hapi, the Role of Economics on the Development of Civilization. People can visit the website hapifilm.com, Hapi, hapifilm.com for more information about the world premiere that's taking place online July 18th, 2020, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Okay, so Dr. J, let me go ahead and finish your thoughts, Dr. J, because we have to take a commercial break.
Yes, well, what I would say, clear to me and until my 84 years, is that this is an extraordinary achievement by young Black scholars, male and female, who've taken the work of the elders like Dr. Ben and Dr. Clark and Dr. Chancellor Williams, and they programmed it into a film format, which will be, for me, clearly, one of the most important processes that will help us into an African Renaissance. In other words, we're stuck with this European, we're stuck with his belief systems, we're stuck with trying to get his degrees. You get the degree in order to understand and appreciate what his world is all about, but you need to give yourself an African degree in studying your own people's history and culture. And so there's an enormous process that we put in place over these last 30, 40, 50 years of community centers and knowledge, community forums. We put Black studies programs all around the world, including England and Brazil and South America, as well as in America. And so we need to see this explosion of knowledge and try to mobilize it in such a way as to create a new consciousness for ourselves, and that there is truly an African Renaissance, a rebirth, that is taking place. And it has various dimensions. It has its economic, political, and cultural dimensions. It has its dimensions in manifesting not only the development of the individual and the family and the clan, but the large ethnic group or ethnic nation. And it continues to show us where we need to go in terms of modern development, and that these nation states that emerged in the 40s, 50s, and 60s after the beautiful, wonderful Pan-African Conference in Manchester, England in 1945, I think it was October, November, that Black people met and they decided to map out a plan, just as Amos Wilson had done during the Civil Rights era. He talked about a blueprint for Black power.
Right.
This brother up from Mississippi, where he survived miseducation of Mississippi. He survived Negro education of Morehouse. And he came on to New York, to the Big Apple, and he survived the Jesuit education of the schools up here. And through it all, he was able to deal with an agenda that's needed that deals with us as African peoples. His specialty was psychology. He wrote books on the education of the Black child,
right,
on the development of the Black child, Black on Black, the service of white supremacy, the African consciousness in reference to Marcus Garvey. And then he pulled all of that knowledge together, all of that experience of trying to deal with the negative world around him, and he came up with a blueprint for Black power. Well, if this film, that process that Itaki and the others have put in place, and they want you to be involved with it, this gives us a chance to develop a blueprint for Pan-Africanism. And so that means that we've got to learn how to deal with the world as we know it, to deal with the world's history as we have inherited, to deal with the future as we want it to be. We have to discard things that don't fit and have played out, and put new things in place. And one of the things is the symbol of our future. Whoever controls the knowledge controls the self-esteem, the self-respect, and the self-development.
That's right.
So we have to get control of the flow of knowledge, and that starts in the beginning with our babies. It starts right in the homes. You don't wait for the 5th or 6-year-old to go into a school to get whitenized. He should be Africanized at home, but that means we got to Africanize the families and the family setting. But we put such a premium on showing white folks we can be as good as they are, like they are, with their culture. Well, we've shown we can do that. But now we need to show the world what is the significance of African culture and how that is the foundation of the human family from the beginning of thinking about life and through the economic development processes that are necessary to produce nations, empires, and significant developments of the human family. So once we capture our own history and put it in a process that will give us a super highway into the modern, into the future world, we won't have to do like Dr. Clark, have a great and mighty walk. We will have a great and mighty movement of our total peoples, 1 billion plus Africans and their 2 billion cousins on the planet. We can't wait for the Trumps of the world to lead us. We have to step out on faith and with this knowledge that we are who we are, and we don't have to falsify it, and we have to be real. And so that's what this process that the brother has put together, going from the pyramids of ancient times through to the movement of the heavenly bodies into the modern world. And so I just want to say that I'm glad that you are continuing your contribution. Very proud of you. Consider you one of my adopted sons.
Yes.
And a lot of we got a big base in Detroit, including Brother Chris and
Chris.
And a whole host of
Brother Charles Farrell of the Charles H. Wright Museum also. Yes.
Right. And so and there was potential. Detroit had this enormous potential. It still has. But to go the way of integration into white chaos and insanity and not Africanizing our world as much as we possibly could has to be looked at. Mm-hmm. We have to study what went wrong. Detroit, of all cities, is a modern city. It's not an old city like Newark, New Jersey, my hometown, which was established as a treaty, or the Lenape Indians of Robert Treat in 1666. Detroit is a post-World War I and World War II city. And so it still has an enormous potential. But we have to put this formula for building for eternity with the Pan-African processes that we're talking about. A symbol of Detroit, of course, is outside of the Cobo Center. And then you got my man, Joe Louis, taking his blows on the world. Right. And Joe represented the physical power of black folk and the endurance of black folk. But he also represented the lack of spiritual and intellectual development. Now, Joe Louis is Joe Louis, Jackie Robinson, all these great physical people that we were presented to. We thought we wanted to be them. But at a certain particular point in my youth, when I moved past the athletics, I wanted to be like Thurgood Marshall, to be a lawyer. I went to law school for a year because I thought I was going to be another Thurgood Marshall.
You wanted to save the race. You wanted to save the race.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but once I saw the world, when I went to Europe, I said, wait a minute, we need to fight for civil rights. But there's human rights, like Malcolm said. There's a world out there that we need to relate to. And so the Hapi film process will start a movement. And a symbol of it, of course, of the Europeanness of the world is the Statue of Liberty in the harbor in New York, welcoming the immigrants. But the root of the Statue of Liberty as a symbol comes from a Frenchman called Edward René Lefleuve de la Boulaye, who came up with the idea of the statue because he was inspired by black folks who fought in the Civil War and helped to end enslavement. And so he said, now that African peoples were part of their own liberation, we can honor America. But eventually that symbol was reversed and transformed into a liberation symbol, away from a liberation symbol into a Masonic symbol. And so a book of laws was put under her arm and a torch of light was put in her hands. And so the symbol of enslavement, the breaking of the chains of enslavement, was put at the bottom of the statue, and the Masonic process was raised up. Now, we need to appreciate that the whole question of secret societies or societies of secrets comes out of the African Southern Asian tradition.
Ashe.
So we need these societies to help tighten us up in what we're doing. So I'm a part of those societies. I'm not anti those societies. I can see how valuable they are. However, you have to have societies of light, not societies of elitism. And unfortunately, the European took the African system of societies of light, opening up the human mind to its potential. And they created these initiations into their limited societies of death. I describe the African value system as the 3 C's: communal, cooperative, and collective spiritual development. Mm-hmm. And that's why you need to have that knowledge transferred to a system in the Masonic tradition from mouth to ear. In other traditions, they give it special reference. How you transfer the knowledge. Africans mastered that because they didn't transfer the knowledge in order for you to become a great individual in and of yourself, but you to become a great individual, contribute to your family and to the larger universe and to the creative force of the universe. So the symbols are there. We need to take them, and the symbol that the European symbol as opposed to the African symbol of the communal, cooperative, spiritual development, that's the African model. The European model, and we got an example in the White House for all of us to see, is domination, destruction, and death.
Yes. Profit
by any means necessary. And you have to have profit in order to develop. You have to create a surplus. But it has to be part of a planned system that's shared, communal, cooperative, and collectively by the people. Whereas the European, coming out of that mentality of the cave, where you didn't know where your next food was going to come from, your food supply, you had to go out and hunt it. You were under the rigors of winter, and you could step outside your cave and freeze your ass off. But Africans come out of the cradles of the sun, and that creates a whole nother relationship between water and land and the movement of the heavenly bodies and the heavenly and the ecology. So we need to understand what the European system is that we've inherited, but we need to move away from it, neutralize it, and put in place the foundations of our own system. And a great example of that is, of course, what our brother Tony Browder has mastered it. Mm-hmm. We have the pyramids, and I've taken that as a means of explaining how we should take information and knowledge. Tony Browder, for example, he's taken the Tekken, the Washington Monument. Yep. And the Washington Monument doesn't have a damn thing to do with Washington in its fullness. It has to do with the African concept of resurrection and rebirth. And so Washington, D.C. itself was laid out not on a European model. It was laid out on a model of the Africans of the Nile. Correct. And in fact, one of our great brothers who was an associate of George Washington, and George Washington recommended him to be a part of the group that was laying out the plan for a new city. And as stated in the film that we've worked on, is that new city was a new city of God, and that the symbol of resurrection and rebirth was put in the center of that city. And Brother Ephidici and others talks about these manifestations stolen from us to use to empower the European in economics, politics, and culture, and then leave the African damaged and abused and at the door as a doormat for other peoples. And so we have to change all of that. It's our time, and we can't expect others to do it for us. The symbol of the pyramid is our Washington, D.C. is a square. And our great brother who challenged Thomas Jefferson, and because Thomas Jefferson was attempting to beg, borrow, and steal the knowledge. And so our brother was able to map out Washington, D.C., pulling from his mind the plans that had been laid out when the Frenchman who was commissioned to lay out a new city, he was disgruntled, and they say he was an alcoholic. And so he left to go back to Paris. So they had to call on a black man to pull out of the minds of his African mind to lay out the plans of this city for this new universe. And so he did. And now we need, and there he is in Washington, in the new museum, in the African American Museum. He's challenging Jefferson.
Right. Benjamin Banneker.
And he's laying out his clock and his new, and his almanac. And so we have to give all due respect for those Africans during the Revolutionary War period who stood for the African victorious consciousness and who knew how to resist the enslavement.
Right.
And then the
Hey,
use
Doc.
of monuments.
Doc, we're up against a break.
Of,
Just a second. We're up against a break. I'll hold you over for a few more minutes. Just one quick second. Hey, JT, are we up against a break right now?
Yeah, we got to go to break.
Okay. All right. You listen to the African History Network show right here on 910 AM, the Superstation, the Future Radio. I'm speaking with Dr. Leonard Jeffries. This is Michael Imhotep. We'll be back in a few minutes.
I knew I could get myself out of this.
Okay, everybody stand by. We have to take mandatory commercial breaks here. We're on 910 AM, the Superstation, WFDF. Okay, we're speaking with Dr. J. So you see somebody talk more than I do, right? So you see where I get it from. All right. We're speaking with Dr. Leonard Jeffries. We're talking about the film Hapi. Hapi is from director Taki Grant. Hapi, the role of economics on the development of civilization. And we'll be back in a few minutes here to wrap up with Dr. Leonard Jeffries. We're going to try to get into some of these other topics here as much as I can. So much going on. Everybody stand by. How you all like this type of information? We're on Facebook. We're on YouTube, The African History Network on Facebook, The African History Network on Facebook, and my YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, IMHOTEP. Everybody stand by. Okay, stand by. We got the commercial running in the background. You all should be able to hear me though. Okay, and we're on our Facebook fan page, The African History Network, The African History Network, The African History Network on Facebook. Let me grab this book real quick. Welcome back to the African History Network show right here on 910 AM, the Superstation, the Future Radio. Hey, I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. It is Sunday, June 21st, 2020, and we are live. We're speaking with one of my teachers, Dr. Leonard Jeffries, and we're talking about a number of different topics, but specifically we're talking about the new documentary, Hapi. Hapi deals with the role of economics on the development of, the role of economics on the development of civilization, the role of economics on the development of civilization. Okay. And we're talking about history with Dr. Leonard Jeffries. We're dealing with a number of different topics. Okay. We have Dr. J back. Okay. Okay. Dr. J, go ahead and finish your thoughts. We had to take a mandatory commercial break there.
This is Brother Charles Westwood.
Hey, Brother Charles, how you doing?
So I'm calling out the JT to pick up. The phone number is 7973. It's 201 area code.
Hey, we're back on the air. Charles, can you hear me?
Yes, brother Ken. The phone is about to die, so Dr. J, we're calling on his cell phone.
Oh, okay.
It's a 201 number.
Okay.
Could you have JT pick that up so we can
hey,
conversation? Hey,
JT, pick up the phone. It's a 201 area code. I think it is. It's Dr. J calling in from another number. Can you pick up that line?
It hung up. Let me redial.
Yeah, I got nothing calling in right now.
Okay. JT, can you get them straight offline while I keep talking?
Okay, thank you.
JT, can you get them taken care of while I keep talking?
All right, it should be good to go.
Okay. Dr. Leonard Jeffries, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. All right, good. Yeah. All right. So during the break, I was telling my listeners, I said, you see where I get it from. Dr. J talks more than I do, right? So you see where I get it from. All right. Okay. So go ahead and finish your thoughts. Go ahead.
There's a part that's of African independence that had a strong move in the 40s, 50s, and 60s as birth of these new nations. So there's so many of these mini states that Africans are trying to make viable. But the problem is that they may not have the capability of being viable. So we need a larger union. So fortunately, the OAU was formed in 1963 when the 40 or so African leaders got together to produce a unity. And then they tried to modernize it in 2000 and so. But we need to have a formula of making these nation states viable so they can serve our people economically, politically, and culturally. And so hopefully that's what this film will help us continue to do, to see our limitations and where we need to go. And one of the important things in terms of imagery is that the leaders of the new African states asked the president of Senegal and President Mbeki, the head of South Africa, to come up with a symbol of where we needed to go. And they produced the Renaissance Memorial, which is in Dakar. It's a fantastic symbol of what we have to do, trying to make these limited states into a viable regional entities. In fact, my master's essay for my master's at Columbia University in African Studies was the Senegal 4-year development plan and the integration of West Africa. I could see after going to Africa in 61, 2, 3, and 4 and whatnot that they needed to find a formula for unity. These mini states were not going to do it. And so there's a great responsibility we have, not only in the New World where we are in these large states like Brazil and Canada and the U.S., we also have to find a formula for the African states to make sure that economics and politics and culture can be maximized. And so what the group that was preparing a symbol came up with was not a Statue of Liberty, not a symbol of the obelisk, the Tekken, but they came up with the rise of the black family and the rise of the black man taking the lead in that family. And the black man is rising, a very powerful image, and he's holding on to his rock, leaning on his rock, the black woman, and he's holding his child up to the Creator and the universe. And that child is pointing ahead. And the child is not pointing north to Europe. It's not pointing east to Mecca. It's not even pointing southeast to other African lands. it's pointing across the Atlantic Ocean to the New World, and it's referencing that the African continent, with its extended outreach into the New World in Canada, the U.S., Central America, the islands of the Caribbean, Brazil, and South America, the Africans in this unified formation will have a meaningful future. And that statue of this wonderful imagery, it's on a volcanic hill, and you can go inside and travel 15 stories up into the black man's, to his powerful thighs, his strong broad shoulders, and into his head. And 30 or 40 people can be into the head of this enormous monument and look out on the world. And then when you go back downstairs, on the ground floor, they have inside the monument workplaces, theater, learning centers, and the whole history of our people is there. Check out the Diop's family, his wife, and his son, his oldest son, Mbaki. They have taken his work and they've organized it in such a way that it, from the beginning of humankind, cradle of civilization, through to the various ages of development, onto the modern world, and projecting the future, all of that is alive and well in this monument, which is pointing to the linkage we have to have between the African world outside of Africa and the African world on the continent. So clearly, this film project that Brother Taki and the others have collaborated in is going to be a benchmark for us to redo the books, redo the films, redo the traditions that we have, and Africanize them.
Absolutely.
So that,
okay, let me ask you this, and then we're gonna let you go because I know you're busy. And also, JT, do we have any callers? I forgot to.
No, sir.
Okay, all right. You have time to take a couple calls, Dr. J?
yes.
Okay.
I have no problem.
Okay, the call-in number, if you have like a quick question or comment, now we're not going to have time for dissertations and manifestos, but if you have a quick question or comment, call-in number is 313-778-7600, 313-778-7600 is the call-in number if you have a question or comment. During the break, I'll grab my copy of the book, Egypt on the Potomac by Tony Browder. Egypt on the Potomac by Tony Browder. Yes. Fantastic book that deals with how the layout of Washington, D.C. is based upon ancient African principles coming out of the Nile Valley region of Africa, specifically ancient Kemet. He also breaks down Masonry and Freemasonry, and Mason meaning son of light, right, coming out of ancient Kemet as well. We're commemorating Juneteenth. This weekend, this period of time, we commemorate Juneteenth. And you have some people who I think they mean well, but they want to make Juneteenth a national federal holiday. Senator Kamala Harris and Senator Cory Booker have introduced a bill in the U.S. Senate. Now, first, it's important to note that African Americans have been celebrating Juneteenth for 155 years in various forms to various degrees. Okay, what are your thoughts on making Juneteenth a federal holiday and a federal paid holiday, things like this?
Well, that's a good question. I'm glad that you raised it. And my response would be ambivalent.
Yeah.
We need our holiday. We need our holidays, and certainly Juneteenth, if it was handled correct, could make a statement to our world. Because Juneteenth references the Civil War, and this nation was divided into two parts: the slave South and the semi-slave North, and to show the contradictions that the Emancipation Proclamation that Lincoln issued was not a freedom document.
Right.
It was a war measure.
military strategy,
arm black folk to participate in the struggle for their own freedom.
Mm-hmm.
And so certain parts of the contradictions in our society are very real. And so it's a perfect example is that the 14th Amendment, 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment were all subject to the contradictions of this system, including Lincoln. He couldn't do without the black people, but then he knew he had to function with white folks. Mm-hmm. So when they used June 19th as a reference to the confusion around enslavement, if we have clarity that the contradiction over June 19th, where the Africans had been freed by the Emancipation Proclamation, but the Emancipation Proclamation was not a wholesale freedom document. Those slave states that had not left the Union could still keep enslavement, including Washington, D.C. So if Juneteenth can show us the contradictions that are built into this system, no matter what level we go at it, then it may make some sense. But to us to celebrate and not talk about the 200,000+ black men who were recruited to give strength to the freedom struggle, and not deal with the 30,000 black men that were the U.S. CT troops, United States colored troops, and the 30,000 black men who were in the Navy, and the millions of black people who were not officially in the Army, but they were the laborers, the spies, the hangers-on. If we could tell our full story without pussyfooting around, so we don't hurt some other people's feelings, then if we can tell the truth, then I would say yes, because we can point out the contradictions that even Lincoln had to be pushed.
Right.
He wasn't running and saying we need. He had to be pushed. And then he was removed by a society of secrets called the KKK with General Bedford Forrest showing how he was going to treat black folk when black soldiers at the Fort Pillow Massacre. We're talking about the massacre at Wall Street. That's dealing with the World War I and post-World War I period. Mm-hmm. But the Civil War post-period, you had the General Bedford Forrest saying, kill every black man, woman, and child. They had surrendered, but they weren't going to give them the dignity of being surrendered and being prisoners. And out of that type of mentality came the Klan. And so if we can tell that story instead of pussyfooting around,
right, tell the truth.
Yes,
right.
Let's tell it.
So let me say this. The reason why I asked that question is I remember a lecture by Dr. Yosef Ben Yakinen, and this was from like the early 90s, because I have it on VHS tape. It's on video cassette tape. That's how old it is. And I remember him talking about the Dr. King Day holiday. And he said that we did a disservice to Dr. King going to the federal government asking for a holiday to celebrate Dr. King. He said, if you want to celebrate Dr. King, you take a day. You don't ask permission. You take a day. OK. And now I've been celebrating Juneteenth for years, and I know you have as well. But one of the things I fear is that if it's made a national holiday, it will be watered down like Dr. King Day in many respects has been watered down in various circles. So and then you have Macy's having a Juneteenth Day sale, like Macy's has a Flag Day sale and things like this, and it loses its significance. Right. Go ahead.
Yeah, so you're absolutely correct. That if it cannot be made a real celebration of the death and destruction that our people had to bear in order to find a way through this maze called these United States, founded not on freedom, justice, and equality. All of the founding fathers were slave master bastards. Jefferson, Washington, Monroe, and Madison. And if we can say how many Africans did they have enslaved, and that they could have and should have freed. Jefferson had 600 or 700. Mm-hmm. Washington had a couple of hundred. So if we can use that to tell the truth about the contradictions, right, and the devastation that black folks had, yes. But so you're right. You have to see where that can go. I don't mind holidays, but because I have fun with the holidays. George Washington Day,
right?
Washington.
When Washington died, when Washington died, he owned. He and his wife collectively owned 318 slaves.
That's right.
Yeah, and only one was free.
Tell a lie.
Yeah,
his whole life was a lie. How could you? And then Jefferson had 600 or 700.
Yeah, about 600. Yeah, total collectively. Yeah. So when Washington passes away, the only enslaved African to be free when he passed away was William Billy Lee. William Billy Lee was his personal servant. Okay. The rest of his slaves are going to be freed once I think it was once Martha Washington passed away. They're going to be freed, if I remember correctly. But William Billy Lee, there's a famous painting done by an artist named John Trumbull. John Trumbull is the same artist. John Trumbull is the same artist who depicted the scene that's on the back of the $2 bill. But in this painting is George Washington and his enslaved African, William Billy Lee. Okay. And William Billy Lee is wearing a turban. People mistakenly think he was not a slave. No, he was. You have to study the history. But behind that, okay, that was William Billy Lee. Very quickly, JT, we have any callers? JT, we have any callers?
I'm sorry about that. Yeah, so let's go to line 2. We have Felicia with her question or comment.
Hey, Felicia, welcome to the African History Network show. Thanks for calling in. Tell us where you're calling from.
I'm calling from Harlem.
Harlem. Okay, Harlem, New York. Okay, that's where Malcolm X was, Harlem. All right, go ahead with your question or comment.
Yeah. Okay, so Dr. Jeffries, can you just talk a little bit about the director, Taki Grant, and like his, like the other works that he's done prior to Hapi, and like how they relate to each other?
Did you get that, Dr. J?
Yes, she had said, could I say a little bit about Taki Grant?
Yeah.
Taki Grant is the brother who has been spending the best part of his life capturing the African history from the Nile Valley and beyond. And he has this ability of feeling our history and translating it into images. I've had the pleasure of traveling with him to the Nile Valley, and a fantastic experience with him and members of his family. And then we went down to Nubia and had the greatest experience I've ever had in the Nile. And he was able to film that and send me photo albums of that experience. And so he's continued to grow with this knowledge. And so he has gotten a team around him to be able to produce the current achievement. But previously he did the trip that we had, he turned it into the Nubian was a DVD, which was a fantastic work through the great history of the Nile. And because most of us don't realize there's the greatest part of the pyramids that are built are in the south. Mm-hmm. They built smaller pyramids, but it's the same concept of letting the human spirit rejoin the creator after death. And so he's had a great interest, and he's always been able to bring people on board to work with him and to share it. So he has enormous credentials. I have a great deal of respect for him. And then he was able to take the great symbol of resurrection and rebirth, which they call the Washington Monument, but the Tekken is the symbol of African rebirth and resurrection that other people have adopted and taken it everywhere. The Pope dragged one up through the Mediterranean out of Egypt and plopped it in the Tekken in the Vatican Square. The French took one and took Tutmosis III statue and put it in front of the Louvre in the plaza near the Louvre. The British took one and put it near the Parliament. The Americans took a second and dragged it up Manhattan. It took them 2 to 3 weeks to drag it from the lower Manhattan up to where it is in Central Park. And so these symbols of African rebirth and resurrection have been co-opted by others. So we need to snatch them back. And Take also, he did it at preliminary work on the Nile Valley in reference to the Texan as well as to Nubia. And he himself had said he got his 9th grade teacher out of the classroom was our brother Chancellor Williams, because at 9th grade he had a chance to read Chancellor Williams' book, The Destruction of Black Civilization.
Yes.
And he said it changed his whole direction of where he was going. And
that's a fantastic book.
We need to see brothers like Chancellor Williams, Dr. Clark, Dr. Ben, and these sisters who have made their great contribution, Francis Cress Welsing, and a whole host of others. We need to take this history and renew ourselves with it. Right. And that symbol of the resurrection and the monument that links us to Africa and holding up our youth and the male and the female together. It's not just a male statue. It's not just a female statue. It's the family. And so I think we're moving in the right direction. And brothers like Brother Taki have to be given their due because they're not in it for money. They're not in it for personal prestige. They're in it for spiritual coming together of our people so this truth can be real and it can be used to socialize us and acculturate us to what our real future has to be, African rebirth and renaissance.
Right. So Taki's 2 previous documentaries, I've seen those and helped distribute those as well. Those are Nubia. One was Nubia. The other one was The Tekken. Okay. 2 fantastic documentaries. Dr. Leonard Jeffries is in both of those documentaries also. Okay. So once again, people visit the website hapifilm.com, HAPI, hapifilm.com. Hapi is one of the basically the original name for the Nile River. Is that correct, Dr. J?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Hapifilm.com. Go ahead.
Because happy, we need to be happy because of the wealth that comes out of the Nile. The Nile overflows its banks with the great waters coming in from inner Africa. And so you have death and destruction. Mm-hmm. But after a certain set of stars come into the heavens at the time the Nile is rising, and at a certain time when the Nile is getting ready to overthrow its banks, a certain set of stars are in another part of the heaven. And then when they overflow, you know that the ecology is being prepared for a great crop. And after a period of fertilizing the soil with the black earth from inner Africa, the certain set of stars are in this period of the heavens, and you can plant your crop. And a couple of crops, in fact. And so in the tradition of the Nile, that birth comes forth in this enormous fertile lands. So you relate the movement of the heavenly bodies with the flow of the Nile. And that burst of water includes things dying and covered up. But then there is a rebirth when the Nile retreats to its banks, and then you can have irrigation and wealth. And so this is where we need to show the African collectivity working together to clear the fields, working together to plant the crops. That's the communal, cooperative, and collective African value system that produced the wealth. The European caveman value system is the opposite. It is domination, destruction, and death. Fear of the universe because you're in a cold, ice environment that you become a predator and not somebody or something that's harmonizing with others.
Right.
So we're going to use this formula, and you'll be able to use it also. People will be able to plug in and grow. So we went crazy with Wakanda, and one of the people who went crazy with it was my wife and I. To see all of these images on the film, but Wakanda was not history. It was in the tradition of the movie industry, which is fantasy. We are taking his story, her story, and putting it in a formula that can be taken into people's homes and into their clubs and into their organizations. We can build a whole curriculum around it, and we've got to do it.
Right.
In fact, I'm looking at some elders that are telling me, Dr. J, continue to do your work because you're on a victorious path.
Right.
And the elders that I'm looking at are a young lady called Atala, and another young lady called Camila, and another lady called Ilyasha.
Right.
And these two young ladies, who are part of this tradition of rebirth and resurrection, are sitting on the laps of two strong African men. And the two first young ladies are sitting on their daddy's lap. And that daddy is El-Haj Malik El-Shabazz, also known as Malcolm X.
Right.
And Ilyasha, the third born of the six, is sitting with security and surety. And the brother holding her got this smile that we are going someplace. And don't hesitate. Stand for right. Don't stand for wrong. And the child is on the lap of Muhammad Ali.
Yes.
The greatest.
Yep.
And
the
so
greatest of all time.
Whoever controls the images controls the self-esteem, the self-respect, and self-development. So we need to control the images, and that's what Tati's film and the others who help them represent. A fantastic, successful, without the billions of money for sets and for all this and that, and salaries.
Right.
And so we have a real New World African cinematic event that we can use as a teaching tool.
Exactly.
And so I'm just looking forward to it. And our brother Charles is here with me. And I've told everybody, if the Creator and the ancestors decide that I've done my job and I have to leave out of here tonight, I'm going to go with a shooting grin on my face.
Right, right.
We're on our path, a victorious path. And you have to tell the audience, I usually don't cuss, but just for effect. So that slipped out. That's
right.
Not
yeah. Okay. That was the African Holy Ghost. I know. That was the African Holy Ghost.
The whole time, no time, all that mess. No, but it wasn't my fault. The devil made me do it.
Right.
But I'm taking
all right.
after anybody that was offended.
All right. Yep. Okay. So we're out of time here as well. So look, Dr. J, it's always good to talk to you. We're going to bring you back. Tell your wife I said hi as well. Thanks, Felicia, for calling in. Once again, people visit the website Hapi, Hapi, hapifilm.com and get your tickets for the premiere July 18th, 2020. Okay. All right, Dr. J. Dr. J, let people know, how can they get in contact with you to do lectures or teaching? How can they get your documentaries? How can they get your DVDs, etc.? Give people your information quickly.
Well, the CIA and FBI have my numbers, so I might as well give them to our family. The cell phone is 201-668-7973. Again, 201-668-7973. And the landline is 201-837-1355. That landline was passed on to me with the ancestors working some magic. There was a young rapper, his name was KOS1.
Right.
And he was living in Teaneck. And my car had slid on the ice and went down an embankment and hit a tree. And there I was. Luckily, I had a big car, so it took the tree down and not me. But while I was sitting there trying to figure out what to do, somebody drives up and his little convertible and waves at me, stops to see whether I'm all right, and that was KRS-One.
Mm-hmm.
It so happened that I was working with him to teach classes in Black Studies, and so KRS-One was a rapper who had a serious motivation.
Yeah, he was a conscious rapper. Yep. Give people that landline. Yeah, give people that landline number again because we're out of time here. 201-827-1335.
Yeah, 201-837.
837.
1355.
1355. Okay. Finish that last. Finish that last sentence.
So I'm here at any time.
Right.
And, I can help the folks who need tapes, books, or whatever.
Okay.
We can make it available.
Finish that last sentence dealing with KRS-One. That last sentence. Okay, because we're out of time here.
Oh, the beauty is that KRS-One was a rapper, but he also was an intellectual. He was interested in the mind. And we were negotiating for him to teach a class at Black Studies. And so it so happened that the creator or ancestors would have me have his, for the last 40 years or whatever, I have his telephone number. Mm-hmm. But even more important was one particular day, an important day in my life, when at noon, KRS-One and I went to a high school in New York, and we spoke to the young people. And then we went 4 blocks up the street to 64th Street, and we did the Donahue Show. Mm-hmm. And you can go on the TV and get
Phil Donahue
from the Donahue Show, and I had to kick his butt. And then that evening at 8 o'clock, we inaugurated the Charlie Rose Show. And I laid him out and gave him a spanking that he never forgot. And so that's one day in the life of Len Jeffries. Students with KRS-One, the Donahue Show, and then Charlie Rose.
Right. All right, Dr. J. You have a good night, okay? I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, brother.
All right.
Appreciate you.
All right, peace.
That's
Hotep.
Much respect for you and yours.
All right, you too, man. Hotep. All right. Okay. So we're basically out of time here on the African History Network Show. We're going to continue this discussion on my social media platforms. Follow me on The African History Network on Facebook, The African History Network on Facebook, and Michael Imhotep, Imhotep, on YouTube. I'm going to keep broadcasting there. Got a little bit more information for you. Visit my website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, for all my information, my lectures, podcasts, recommended reading list of books. Also, you can donate to the African History Network, $ the AHN Show through Cash App, $ the AHN Show through Cash App, and also through PayPal, paypal.me /the AHN Show, paypal.me /the AHN Show. All right, so at the African History Network, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world, because right now it's correct wrong behavior. It's not over till we win. Wakanda forever. We'll talk to you next week. Peace. Okay, everybody.
Hi, I'm Joan London with Thanks for Mom.
Everybody stand by. Let me disconnect this call here. Okay, good. Okay, so we're still here on my social media platform. That's Dr. J. Dr. J goes. Man, he just, that's one of my teachers. He just goes. So, you know. All right. So we're going to be here for a little while longer. How's everybody doing? Share this broadcast on your social media platforms. Follow me on my Facebook fan page, The African History Network, The African History Network. Turn on your notifications so you know when we go live. Also, follow me on my YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, Imhotep. Okay, we're going to shift gears quickly here. We'll talk about some more. We'll talk about Juneteenth some more next week. We talked about Juneteenth some this week. A little bit tonight. We'll talk about it some. Hold on. We'll talk about it some more next week. We'll try to squeeze in a little bit of information about Juneteenth. But I want to. Yeah, I'll squeeze in a little bit of information about Juneteenth tonight. We'll talk about it some more next week. And we'll continue talking about ancient Jemima and Black Wall Street, Tulsa, Oklahoma next week as well, next Sunday. I want to get to this story here. Rayshard Brooks. Okay, so the officers who killed, the officer who killed Rayshard Brooks and the other officer on the scene, they were both arrested and charged this past week. Former Atlanta police officer Garrett Rolfe, R-O-L-F-E, turned himself into authorities a day after he was charged with felony murder and 10 other counts in the shooting death of Rayshard Brooks. Okay, I think that was on June 18th. Yeah, that was the June 18th that took place. He turned himself in. A second officer who was charged with aggravated assault in the case, Devin Brosnan, also surrendered. He had been placed on administrative duty. Now, for the first time since the shooting, Devin Bronson spoke out to on June 18th, 2020, to MSNBC. That was Thursday, to MSNBC, calling the killing of Rayshard Brooks a tragic event and expressing his full faith in the criminal justice system. Okay. He did an interview with Chuck Todd and Katie Tur, and he was there with his attorney. Brosnan's attorney, Don Samuel, called the charges against him false and said the officer suffered a concussion. Okay. Officer Brosnan suffered a concussion as he and Devin Rolfe scuffled with Rayshard Brooks in a Wendy's parking lot that Friday night. Now, video from the scene appears to show Rayshard Brooks half turn and fire a taser he had taken from Brosnan, and then Rolfe firing the fatal shots. Brooks was struck twice in the back, the autopsy found. Now, Fulton County District Attorney Paul Howard said that Officer Brosnan stood on Brooks' shoulder while he was dying on the ground, an accusation that Brosnan's attorney, Don Samuel, disputes. Attorney Don Samuel, the attorney for Officer Brosnan, said Brosnan did not immediately realize that Rayshard Brooks had been shot and put his foot on what he thought was Rayshard Brooks' hand or on his arm to make sure he could not get a weapon because he did not know what the situation was. He was saying that Brosnan fell down, had a concussion, didn't know that Rayshard Brooks was shot. He gets up and trying to assess the scene and doesn't know what just took place. Now, defense attorney Don Samuel also took issue with District Attorney Paul Howard Jr.'s claim on Wednesday that Officer Brosnan had turned state's witness. Now, Officer Brosnan is fully cooperating with the investigation, his attorney Don Samuel said, but, quote, he's not a state's witness or a defense witness. He's a witness. He's going to answer anybody's questions accurately. Now, District Attorney Paul Howard Jr., who did an excellent job of laying out the charges against the officers, he spoke with Andrea Mitchell on MSNBC on, I think that was Thursday. Oh, yeah, on Thursday, June 18th. And he said that the district attorney's office sticks by their comments. Okay, let's go to this clip.
Thank you so much for joining us. I know how busy you must be. First of all, has Officer Rolfe turned himself in? He is the officer that you have charged with murder, first-degree murder.
To this point, he has not turned himself in. We've not received information that he has turned himself in. We know that Brosnan has, but we're still waiting on Officer Rolfe.
Can you clarify a dispute that has arisen in the last 24 hours between the attorneys for Officer Brosnan and your initial statement as to whether or not he is a cooperating state's witness? They say that his lawyers say he's cooperating and giving his story, but that he's not, quote, a state's witness.
Andrea, let me tell you, that's really just, that whole discussion is subterfuge away from the real important issues in this case. I will just say that we stick by our comments made on yesterday, but I'm hoping people will turn back to the crux of this issue. And the crux of this issue is that Mr. Brooks is dead for really no valid reason at all.
There's a lot of visual evidence. Obviously, many people, including the mayor from her comments last night, were not aware of those still photos showing one officer kicking, Officer Rolfe kicking Mr. Brooks, and Officer Brosnan standing on him. Tell me your reactions and how important that was, as well as the shot that was fired into another car with 3 witnesses.
Well, my staff and I all probably had visceral reactions when we saw the videotape, the surveillance tape showing the kick and showing Officer Brosnan standing on the body of Mr. Brooks. I could not imagine a circumstance that would illustrate a more total lack of respect for him and for what he represented. But you also got to consider, not only were they disrespecting Mr. Brooks, this action took place in an open parking lot at a restaurant where people were out filming them, and the officers apparently, that did not mean anything to them. The shot that was fired into the car of the gentleman who was visiting from Memphis, it just shows how this situation had really gotten out of control and how reckless it was to fire that weapon at a restaurant parking lot, not being able to control where the projectiles would end up. And as one of the those witnesses said on yesterday, it's really fortunate that we're not talking about an additional death other than Mr. Brooks.
Do you have any concern that you may have overcharged Officer Rolfe, given how hard it is to convict a police officer and how much visual evidence there is that there was at least a struggle before Mr. Brooks ran away and was clearly shot in the back?
No, we have made a careful examination of the evidence, and in this case, because we've had the opportunity to review 8 separate videos or video surveillance incidents of what happened, I'm not concerned about being overcharged. And also, this marks, I believe, about the 39th or 40th police case that we prosecuted. This marks the 9th time that we have been involved in a police shooting that resulted in someone's death. And so we've charged a felony murder before. It has not been problematic. So I'm not really concerned about overcharging.
Now, you presented in your case, when you made your presentation yesterday, that the laser was no longer functional after it had been fired twice. Do you understand how this got so out of control, where for 41 minutes there was what visually seemed to be a very normal conversation, a cooperative person? Do you know how it got to the point where Mr. Brooks was shot in the back?
Well, when you watch the incident, as we've talked about the 41 minutes, it's a very informal, casual, almost a jovial conversation. But at the end of that 41 minutes, the officer, based upon his own department's regulations, was supposed to inform Mr. Brooks that they were arresting him for a DUI. The officer did not do that immediately as the regulation required, but what he did was he moved to the rear of Mr. Brooks and he attempted to restrain him. So when he did that, you could see Mr. Brooks react, and his reaction was to start running. So an incident that had been calm up until that exchange then turned into something that we all know now has progressed to the shooting of Mr. Brooks.
I'm going to be speaking to the House Speaker in a moment. How important is it, do you think, that there be a national standard for the use of force, given what has happened repeatedly with this kind of issue, with the police using force against minority communities, principally Black communities?
Well, Andrea, I believe that we really need to stop playing around with this issue. I really believe that's what we've been doing in this country. we've been just talking about it. We're really not serious yet, because when we are serious, I think that what we're going to do is we are going to form a national, independent, new department in the federal government that will do 4 different things. One of those things is to collect data. The second thing that they would do is to create standards and training. The third thing I think they ought to do is to reward communities and police departments who de-escalate situations. And the fourth thing this national agency should do is to create a place where citizens can complain and get cases prosecuted. I don't think we're going to see any real significant reductions until we put together this agency, because that agency will send a signal to communities that finally we are serious about this problem. Because right now people don't think that our country is serious about solving this problem. We just keep talking about it.
Okay, so that was from Andrea. That was Andrea Mitchell Reports. That was on MSNBC, June 18th, 2020. She interviewed Paul Howard Jr., and Paul Howard Jr. is the Fulton County District Attorney. You can go to MSNBC.com and just search for Paul Howard Jr., and that clip will come up. And actually, the name of that clip is I'll give you the name of that clip here. Very, very important interview that she did. Also, Roland Martin has done a few interviews with him as well. Watch Roland Martin Reports. Watch Roland Martin Unfiltered. Monday through Friday, it airs live 6 p.m. to 8 p.m., basically about 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We share the broadcast live here on the African History Network. Also, Rachel Maddow did a very good interview with Paul Howard Jr. as well. Fulton County District Attorney Paul Howard Jr. dealing with the Rashad Brooks case. Okay. NBCnews.com has some good articles dealing with this as well. Let me zip through some of this quickly, and then I want to get to this whole misunderstanding that the 3/5 Compromise of 1787 said that slaves were 3/5 of a human being. Okay, that's not true. I'm going to go to that in just a minute here. Let me give you some articles to read because we're short on time here. Donald Trump's little speech at Tulsa, in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Now, keep in mind, Oklahoma is not a battleground state. He won Oklahoma. He won the state of Oklahoma in 2016. He got like 65% of the votes. In the 2016 presidential election. Oklahoma is not a battleground state. It's a Republican state. So why did he go to Oklahoma? Now, what experts are saying is his advisors, his staff thought that Oklahoma would be somewhere where he would be sure to get a huge turnout. Well, that's not what happened. NBCnews.com is reporting Trump furious about underwhelming crowd at Tulsa rally. Trump furious about underwhelming crowd at Tulsa rally. Donald Trump is furious at the underwhelming crowd at his rally in Tulsa, Oklahoma on Saturday evening, June 20th, a major disappointment for what had been expected to be a raucous return to the campaign trail. Okay. A raucous return to the campaign trail after 3 months off because of the coronavirus pandemic. That was largely his fault. All this was largely avoidable if he had read his presidential daily briefings, had not dismantled global pandemic teams, had not had John Bolton remove Timothy Zimmer in May of 2018, who was the head of the National Security Council global pandemic team, if they had not fired hundreds of scientists and things like this, and had not declared war on the scientists for the past 3 years. This stuff was largely avoidable. Okay. So to the campaign trail after 3 months off because of the coronavirus pandemic, according to multiple people close to the White House. Donald Trump was fuming at his top political aide Saturday, even before the rally began, after his campaign revealed that 6 members of Donald Trump's advance team on the ground in Tulsa, Oklahoma, had tested positive for COVID-19, including Secret Service personnel. A person familiar with the discussion said, "Well, they're not wearing. A lot of them are not wearing masks. A lot of them are not wearing surgical masks. Now they're not protecting themselves. Many of them. So what'd you think was going to happen?" Trump asked those around him why the information was exposed and expressed annoyance that the coverage ahead of his mega rally was dominated by the revelation, while the Trump re-election effort boasted that it would fill BOK Center, BOK Center, which seats more than 19,000 people. Only 6,200 supporters ultimately occupied the general admission sections. The Tulsa Fire Marshal told NBC News. Now, the campaign was so confident about a high turnout that it set up an overflow area, which it had expected to attract thousands, but the plan was scrapped at the last minute when only dozens gathered at the time that Vice President Mike Pence and Donald Trump were set to address the crowd inside. Quote, "It's politics 101. You under promise and over deliver," a Trump ally said, conceding the missteps the Trump 2020 team took in the lead up to the event by saying nearly 1 million people had responded to requests for admission. Now, much of the blame is falling on campaign manager Brad Parscale, who in the days leading up to the event aggressively touted the number of registrations, but those close to him stressed that his job is safe for now. Now, they said, the Trump campaign said there were 1 million registrations. They expected 100,000 people to show up, okay, to show up, and the place only sits a little more than 19,000. 6,200 people showed up, okay? There are growing concerns among Trump campaign officials that neither Donald Trump nor the 2020 campaign have a coherent message for why he should serve a second term. The message is law and order, lock up the undocumented immigrants, send them back, build the wall, we love the blacks, MAGA loves the blacks. Okay, this is the message, okay? We have the greatest economy in the history of the world, except 46 million people have filed for unemployment in the past 13 weeks, but the economy is going to come roaring back. We're winning against coronavirus, even though 120,000 people have died. Don't worry about that. It's going to be zero pretty soon. It's all going to wash away. That's the message. Okay. Now, Saturday evening's meandering, nearly two-hour rally speech is the latest evidence of a lack of targeted strategy to attack Joe Biden with less than 5 months to go until the general election. Also, we're going to deal with part 5 of Joe Biden's policies for the African-American community. We'll squeeze that in each week. His 22-page agenda, which I have actually read, unlike some people like Charlamagne God, who interviewed Joe Biden, hadn't read the entire plan, even though March 9th, 2020, you were interviewed by Craig Melvin on MSNBC. And you call Biden out for not having a black agenda. And he puts out a very detailed 22-page black agenda. Then when you interviewed him on the Breakfast Club, you had not read the entire black agenda because you said I read some of it. Okay. Read this article. Trump furious about underwhelming crowd at Trump rally, at Tulsa rally, June 21st, 2020, NBCnews.com. Because I told you like 6 weeks ago, I'm listening to Charlamagne. He doesn't understand politics. And the more he talks, the more I'm proved correct. Okay. I like Charlamagne, but he needs to do more research. Then read this article also from NBCnews.com. Trump delivers freewheeling speech, smaller than expected crowd in largely conservative Tulsa. Trump delivers freewheeling speech, smaller than expected crowd in largely conservative Tulsa. We'll post the links here on the thread of the broadcast for these articles. New York Times has a fact check on all these lies Trump told. Fact checking Trump's Tulsa rally, COVID-19 protesters and Biden. Fact checking Trump's Tulsa rally, COVID-19 protesters and Biden. And it's also Father's Day, everybody. Happy Father's Day to all the fathers. Thanks for the Father's Day wishes that I received. People sending me text messages today, things like that. In his first rally in months, President Trump made multiple statements that were false, misleading, or lacked evidence. One of these dumbass statements that he made was when you do testing to that extent, you're going to find more people, you're going to find more cases, because more cases are coming up because the infection rate is increasing. Coronavirus is spreading. It's not just increased testing. No, the infection rate is increasing. And the reason why is because a lot of these states opened up too soon. And now people are not practicing social distancing. A lot of people are not wearing masks. Okay, so this claim is false by Trump. The United States has conducted more than 26 million tests and recorded more than 2.2 million cases, but this still probably undercounts the scale of the pandemic, and ramped up testing does not account for the higher number of cases. Donald Trump's suggestion that the number of cases is proportional to the number of tests does not hold water. Brazil has the second highest number of cases at over 1 million, but it has conducted 2.4 million tests. Conversely, Russia has conducted 16.7 million tests and reported about 577,000 cases. The U.S. has about 120,000 cases, and the U.S. has, we'll look at about 120,000 deaths, and the U.S. is at about let's see how many. It's about 2.2 million reported cases. Okay, so other metrics show that the pandemic is just more severe in the United States than other countries. The United States, for example, conducts roughly 21 tests to find one case, whereas Italy, one of the countries hardest and earliest hit by the coronavirus, performs about 188 tests to find one case. Russia has conducted more daily tests on a per capita basis than the United States, but its share of tests that come back as positive is lower. Okay, so yeah, you're doing about 2.2 million confirmed cases in the U.S. and about 120,000 deaths. Okay, so read the rest of this. They go through and fact check a lot of these lies that Trump told at this rally. And then also Washington Post has this good article, analysis, 5 takeaways from Trump's Tulsa rally. Analysis, 5 takeaways from Trump's Tulsa rally from the Washington Post. Okay, so check out those articles, and we'll post the links here for these as well. All right, let me go to, let's see, just bear with me for a minute here as I make sure we cover these things. NBCnews.com also had a good article dealing with Juneteenth and the Tulsa Massacre, 1921 Tulsa Massacre, involving Black Wall Street. From Juneteenth to the Tulsa Massacre, what isn't taught in classrooms has a profound impact. From Juneteenth to the Tulsa Massacre, what isn't taught in classrooms has a profound impact. I'll probably do a separate broadcast dealing with that in the upcoming days, okay, because that is extremely important information. Also, NBC News has a very good article. Now I monitor about 35 different news sources on a daily basis. Okay, so I'm just giving you some highlights of articles that I've read, and we don't have time to get deep into this. Trump is about to land his 200th federal judge. The impact will last generations. Trump is about to land his 200th federal judge. The impact will last generations. NBCnews.com, June 18, 2020. Justin Walker epitomizes the conservative judicial project. He became a federal judge at the age of 37 with no trial experience and sterling right-wing credentials. 8 months later, he has been promoted to the powerful U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit, a frequent feeder to the U.S. Supreme Court. Justin Walker's confirmation on Thursday by a Senate vote of 51-42 puts Donald Trump one shy of his 200th judicial confirmation, which is teed up for next week. It's a number not achieved by any president at this stage in 4 decades. A Harvard Juris Doctorate holder, J.D. holder, Justin Walker's meteoric rise was aided by his Kentucky ties to Senator Majority Leader Moscow Mitch McConnell, a family friend for whom he once interned, and his outspoken conservatism. Just 2 years ago, he called the 2012 Supreme Court ruling to uphold Obamacare, quote unquote, catastrophic. Okay, read this article. As I explained to people in 2016, and a lot of people didn't understand what I was talking about. They understand now. They didn't understand in 2016 because they don't study politics. A presidential election is not about one person versus another person. This is about ideology and the trajectory of this country. There is so much at stake. U.S. Supreme Court justices, federal judges, okay, Department of Education, Attorney General, the Department of Justice, okay. You have Department of Agriculture, the Department of Energy, Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. You have policies impacting the economy, policies impacting the looking out for pandemics, getting ahead of pandemics so you don't have a catastrophe like what's taking place right now. This was largely avoidable with coronavirus. This is what happens when you have someone incompetent in office who does not listen to the scientists, who declares war on the scientists. And then also at the same time, we look at someone who's declared war on their own FBI and things like this because he's so corrupt. He knows the FBI will expose him. So he's at war with his FBI as well. Okay. And the Republicans were the party of law and order. And then we look at how John Bolton, in John Bolton's book, his former national security advisor, is exposing how corrupt Donald Trump was and exposing how Trump was trying to get President Xi of China to buy crops from swing states to help Trump win re-election. All types of things John Bolton is exposing. Now, John Bolton should have testified in the U.S. Senate. He should have testified in the U.S. House of Representatives during the impeachment trial. He wanted to say that information for his $2 million book deal. But John Bolton knew what was going on. There's others that know what's going on as well. This is how corrupt Trump is. This is why he's unfit to be president. This is why he must be voted out of office November 3rd, 2020. Okay. So let's go through. Okay. That clip from MSNBC that I shared. Okay, I had it up here. Just 1 second. Okay, because this second laptop I'm having problems with. Okay, we'll get that. But go to msnbc.com and search for Paul Howard Jr. Okay. Andrea Mitchell reports she interviewed Paul Howard Jr. All right. Okay. Well, I want to go to this clip here. This deals with the Emancipation Proclamation. I'm sorry. This deals with the Three-Fifths Compromise, 1787. Name of that clip: Fulton County DA speaks after 2 officers charged in Rashard Brooks case. Okay. June 18th, 2020. When we look at Juneteenth, we'll go to this clip here in just a minute of an interview I did with Dr. Paul Finkelman dealing with the Three-Fifths Compromise, 1787. When we deal with Juneteenth, just so people understand, Juneteenth was not the last day of slavery. That's when the slaves in Galveston, Texas, found out that they were free. Okay. On June 19th, 1865, 2 months after the surrender of Confederate General Robert E. Lee at the Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia, Union General Gordon Granger and approximately 1,800 federal troops arrived in Galveston, Texas to take control of the state and enforce the Emancipation Proclamation. Now, it's important to note the Emancipation Proclamation did not legally free the slaves. The reason why is because it applied to the territories and states that seceded from the Union. Well, the Confederacy set up their own government and you no longer have control over them. Okay. And then also when you read it, go to loc.gov, the Library of Congress website, and also go to archives.gov, the National Archives, and read it. It tells you that the territories and states that are still in the Union, okay, they can still keep their slaves. So Maryland, Missouri, Kentucky, and Delaware, the border states, B-O-R-D-E-R, the border states were allowed to keep their slaves. Maryland, Kentucky, Delaware, okay, Missouri, they were allowed to keep their slaves. So Major General Gordon Granger read General Order Number 3, which declared in part, quote, "The people of Texas are informed that in accordance with a proclamation from the executive of the United States, all slaves are free, end quote. Juneteenth, which is short for June 19th, 1865, is a holiday commemorating this day, which marked the effective end of slavery in the United States. However, you're going to have slave owners in Galveston, Texas, who are still going to hold Africans in bondage for another year to get another year's work out of them. Okay, a lot of them, it said that the notice, they did not receive news that they were freed. Okay, so it does not mark the last day of slavery. It marks when Major General Gordon Granger delivered General Order Number 3 to the enslaved Africans, about 250,000 of them there in Texas. Okay. Now, more than 2 years before General Gordon Granger's announcement, President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1st, 1863, which made known that all enslaved people in Confederate states in rebellion against the Union, quote, shall be thenceforward and forever free, end quote. Now, in reality, the Emancipation Proclamation did not instantly free any slaves because it only applied to places under Confederate control and not to slaveholding borders or rebel areas already under Union control. So even areas in the Union, even Confederate territories that came under Union control, okay, they were still allowed to keep their slaves also. However, as Northern troops advanced into the Confederate South, many slaves fled behind Union lines. Okay. Now, the westernmost of the Confederate states, Texas, did not get news of General Robert E. Lee's surrender at Appomattox that April until 2 months after the fact. But they heard once Union General Gordon Granger, a New Yorker and West Point graduate with a distinguished wartime service record, arrived in Galveston Bay with more than 2,000 Union troops. It was on June 19th that he publicly read General Order Number 3. In amazement and disbelief, the 250,000 former slaves in Texas learned that they had been freed by the Emancipation Proclamation, but it really didn't free them, which could not be enforced until the war was over. Okay. It shocked, likely fearful of an uncertain future in which they could do as they pleased, the liberated slaves of Texas celebrated. Their moment of jubilee was spontaneous and ecstatic, began a tradition of marking freedom on Juneteenth. Okay, so a couple of good articles you can read about this. BlackPast.org has one dealing with Juneteenth. BlackPast.org has one dealing with Juneteenth. And then also history.com, Juneteenth, the growth of an African-American holiday. That's at blackpast.org. Then also history.com has one on Juneteenth as well, history.com. They just updated theirs in June 2020. And I have a 3-hour lecture dealing with the history of Juneteenth where I go deep into all this history. This is at africanhistorynetwork.com, africanhistorynetwork.com. It's a 3-hour presentation on sale, $10. And then also we have my lecture dealing with the history of Black Wall Street, 2.5-hour lecture. Black Wall Street from Destruction to the Resurrection of Economic Empowerment. Okay. Both of these are at africanhistorynetwork.com, africanhistorynetwork.com. All right. I want to go to the interview I did with Dr. Paul Finkelman here. And we dealt with the 3/5 Compromise of 1787 and how people misunderstand what it was. Okay. People mistakenly think that it said that the slaves were 3/5 of a human being. And on MSNBC on Saturday, June 20th, on Reverend Al Sharpton's show, Politics Nation, I heard him say, he was talking about Juneteenth and things like that. And then he said it commemorates when we were freed 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation freed us. No, it did not. Emancipation Proclamation did not free the enslaved Africans. 1. 2, he said the U.S. Constitution said we were 3/5 of a human being. That's false. Okay. Everybody share this information on your social media platforms. We're going to dispel these myths And I've heard African-American attorneys say the U.S. Constitution said we 3/5 of a human being. No, it did not. But also one of my heroes, you see the picture behind me, Malcolm X in 1963, when he was interviewed at the University of California, Berkeley, famous interview, he said the U.S. Constitution said we 3/5 of a human being. No, it did not. Okay. Here's the real history. Let's go to this clip here. Interview I did with Dr. Paul Finkelman.
2019, 6 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. He's going to be speaking on Thomas Jefferson and slavery, treason against the hopes of mankind. He's the author of the book Slavery and the Founders, Race and Liberty in the Age of Jefferson. He's also the writer of a fantastic article for the New York Times called The Monster of Monticello, which talks about Thomas Jefferson. And he will be doing a book signing as well. Okay, so Dr. Paul Finkelman, you also wrote a fantastic article for TheRoot.com that I cite all the time, and my listeners are familiar with it. It's called 3/5 Clause, Why Its Taint Persists. 3/5 Clause, Why Its Taint Persists, which deals with the real history of what's known as the 3/5 Compromise of 1787. So please explain it to us, and why do so many people misunderstand what it says?
Okay, so everybody tighten their seatbelts because you're going to get a lecture in constitutional law, and it's sometimes confusing.
Mm-hmm.
Start with this. At the Constitutional Convention, the delegates are trying to decide how you allocate representatives in Congress.
Yes, apportionment.
How many members of the House of Representatives will each state get?
Yes.
And they decide it should be based on population. And that's the democratic way of doing it.
Mm-hmm.
The next question is, who do you count in the population?
Right.
The Northerners, who are either have gotten rid of slavery, like Massachusetts, where there is no slavery anymore,
mm-hmm.
or are getting rid of slavery, like Pennsylvania, where they have a law which says that no one can be born a slave, so all people born in Pennsylvania will be born free,
right.
and slavery will literally die out. They say that you cannot count slaves for representation because slaves are not voters, they're not part of the political process, and they remind the Southerners that every time there's been a discussion about slavery in the past, the Southerners have all said, these aren't people, this is our property.
Right.
Slaves are property. And so the Northerners say, well, one Northerner mocks them and says, well, if you can count your slaves for representation, why can't we count our sheep and horses?
Mm-hmm.
Because, if it's property, it's property. And the Southerners say, oh, no, these are people. We have to count them for people.
Right.
And so what it is, in part, it's a debate about morality. One representative from one of the delegates in Pennsylvania says that this is obscene because what you're doing is encouraging people from South Carolina to go to Africa and kidnap slaves and kidnap black people, bring them to the United States,
mm-hmm.
make them slaves, and then they'll get more representatives in Congress
right.
because they'll have more slaves.
Right.
And they say, we can't do this. And the Southerners say, the slaves produce wealth, they're part of the economy, and therefore we should get representation for them in Congress.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately, what they decide is that you'll count the slaves at a 3/5 ratio.
Right.
So if let's suppose you got a state, you got one representative for every 100,000 people in your state, and you have a state with 500,000 slaves and 500,000 free people, right?
Right.
You get 5 representatives for the 500,000 free people. You get 3 representatives, 3/5 for the 500,000 slaves.
Right.
Okay. Now, here's where it gets confusing.
Mm-hmm.
If you are anti-slavery, if you don't like slavery, then you don't want to count slaves at all for representation.
Right.
You want the Constitution to say representation will be based on the whole number of free people, period. End of story.
Mm-hmm.
And if you are a Southern slave owner, you want to count all the slaves for representation.
Right, exactly. That's what they want to do. And they're going back and forth debating this to determine how to count them. Some are saying let's count half the population. Some are saying let's count 3/4 of the population. go ahead and let people know what ended up happening.
That's right. And that's, so the debate is about whether or not you count slaves for representation. In the end, the Southerners get a big victory.
Right.
Because they get to count their slaves 3/5, which means that the more slaves they have, the more votes in Congress they have. But the slaves don't get the vote. They're not counted at all.
Right.
And the misunderstanding is that this is about race. That is, that the convention is saying that a black is a 3/5 of a person. And that's not what they're saying, because remember, the people who oppose slavery won't count slaves at all for representation.
Right. The Northerners, basically the Northerners.
Yeah,
right.
That's right. And the Southerners who love slavery, they want to count slaves fully for representation.
Right.
It's not about the personhood of the slave. It's about how much power the South gets versus the North.
And very quickly here, so we're referring to Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3 of the U.S. Constitution. And I just want to read it here briefly so people understand what we're talking about. Because the key word is apportioned. The key word is apportioned, which determines how do you determine how many seats in the House of Representatives a particular state has. Okay, so we'll have. So people can go to loc.gov, which is the Library of Congress website, and you can read the U.S. Constitution there for free. Or you can go to archives.gov, which is the National Archives. You can read it there for free also. And the Trump's government shutdown does not mean that website's not working. It's still working. But here's what it says. Representatives and direct taxes. Representatives and direct taxes shall be apportioned among the several states which may be included within the Union, according to their respective numbers, which shall be determined by adding to the whole number of free persons. The whole number of free persons, including those bound to service for a term of years and excluding Indians not taxed 3/5 of all other persons with a capital P. Okay, so once again, people misinterpret that. And I've heard attorneys say the U.S. Constitution said that black people are 3/5 of a human being. That's not what that is saying. Go ahead, Doc.
And by the way, by this time, there's a growing number of free blacks in the North.
We're talking 1787. We're talking about 1787. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's right. And they're counted as a whole person because they're free.
Right. And they can vote also. You're going to have someone who can vote as well.
That's right. So here's the great irony. After the Civil War, and remember, there's only one reason for the Civil War, to protect slavery.
Right.
The Civil War is about slavery. It is not about states' rights. It is not about the Northern economy oppressing the Southern economy. It's about creating a country where slavery will be protected forever.
Right.
And the vice president of the Confederacy says slavery is the
Alexander Stevens
of the Confederacy.
And if you also, and very quickly, if you also read the statements of secession from the 11 states that secede from the Union, they tell you how crucial slavery is to their wealth and their way of life, and that they're fighting to maintain it also.
South Carolina says we're seceding from the Union because a man's been elected president who believes that slavery should be put on the road of ultimate extinction. That's Lincoln.
Right.
Okay, so after the Civil War, the South is going to get more representation in Congress than it had before the war.
Right.
Because now all the slaves are free. And so the irony of this is that these Southern pro-slavery traders are actually going to have more political power than they had before the war.
Right. Because 90% of black people lived in the South, basically, after the Civil War ends. Right.
And as late as 1900.
Yes. Yeah. Before the Great Migration. Yes.
Yeah. And by the way, to this day, a majority of African Americans live in the South.
Yeah, because we're moving back because of gentrification up north.
but the fact is that there has been no time when a majority have not lived in the South.
Yeah.
there is no time when the majority of African Americans live outside the former 15 slave states.
Right.
So this is the great irony. So it is not a statement about racial equality. It's a fight over power. And then there's the one further irony.
Go ahead.
The president is elected by something called the Electoral College.
Right.
The Electoral College was based on counting the number of representatives you had in Congress to determine how many electoral votes you got. So this crazy system whereby a candidate with the most votes doesn't get elected president, and it's happened twice in my lifetime. Al Gore and Hillary Clinton both got more votes than the guy who won.
Right.
That's because of the Electoral College, and the Electoral College was created for slavery. When they're debating how to choose the president, James Madison, the father of the Constitution, says the best thing would be for the people to elect the president. And then he says, but one of the problems with that is our Negroes won't count.
Right.
I.e., we won't get any power for our slaves.
Right.
So we're still stuck with this last horrible vestige of slavery called the Electoral College.
Exactly. So it was James Madison and Alexander Hamilton, if I remember right, the two that created the Electoral College.
Actually, Hamilton's not there much. He's not involved.
Okay.
It's other people.
It was two, but it was. Go ahead.
Madison's the one who suggested, and he makes it very clear. I'm suggesting this because this way we're going to get more votes for the president because we're going to count our slaves in terms of these electors.
Right.
Not that the slaves can vote.
Right.
Yeah. So that's our history.
Right. So we're still talking about 1787, and this is at the Philadelphia Convention, basically the spring of 1787, where they're debating what should be in the Constitution, what should be taken out, things like this. So then Section 2 of the 14th Amendment of 1868 corrects how the count is taking place in dealing with the Three-Fifths Compromise of 1787, Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3 of the U.S. Constitution. Is that correct? Okay.
That's correct. And so what the 14th Amendment says, and it's long, so I'm not going to read it all.
Okay.
I'm going to summarize it.
Sure.
But basically, what it says is this: that if the states don't allow equal franchise, they will have their representatives in Congress reduced by the percentage of the people that are allowed to vote.
Yes, absolutely. And once again, people can go to loc.gov, which is the Library of Congress website, or archives.gov. Those are two free sources that I can give you right now. And just search for U.S. Constitution. You can read that. That's Section 2 of the 14th Amendment. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, I was going to say you could probably just Google U.S. Constitution text.
Sure.
You'll get all sorts of opportunities.
Yep.
You don't even have to go to those websites.
Yep, you can do that also. Absolutely.
So what we end up with is a system that is designed to protect slavery.
Right.
It's designed to make slavery more powerful and to embed it in the Constitution.
Exactly. And to eliminate the Electoral College, then that takes to amend to create a constitutional amendment. It has to pass both the House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate by a 2/3 majority vote, and then it has to be ratified by 3/4 of the state legislatures also.
That's right.
So people have to understand you have to vote, okay? Because it's not just the House of Representatives and the Senate; it's also your members of the state House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate. They vote. Go ahead.
And the governor.
And the governor.
And the mayor.
So explain that process quickly if you have a couple minutes. Explain that to actually amend the Constitution and eliminate the Electoral College. Because a lot of people say, half the people who say don't vote say we need to get rid of Electoral College, right? But if you could go ahead and just explain that a little bit more for a couple minutes, if you don't mind.
Sure. So the way you change the Constitution is by an amendment, and the amendment is done by the House of Representatives or the Senate proposing it. You have to have a 2/3 vote in both the House and the Senate.
Right.
And then you have to have 3/4 of the states vote to ratify the amendment. It's a very hard process.
Right.
But it could be done.
Right.
And it's a question of whether or not the people are going to go out and vote. I mean,
right.
the bottom line is that people get cynical and they say, well, I don't love this candidate,
right.
so I'm not voting.
Right.
I don't think this candidate is perfect, so I'm not voting. Well, let me tell you, nobody's perfect.
Right. Exactly.
Nothing is perfect. The question is, do you want better or do you want worse?
Right. And we need to look at their issues, their policies, and see how their policies match up with our agenda, match up with our issues, what we're concerned about also.
Okay, so that was my interview with Dr. Paul Finkelman, who's actually a historian, history professor, also author of 50 books. I originally interviewed him, let's see, what was that date? I think it was January 18th, 2019 on the African History, Sunday, January 13th, 2019 on the African History Network show. That full interview is on my YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, Imhotep. Also in that same show, I interviewed Dr. Claude Anderson as well, another one of my teachers. So I interviewed Dr. Claude Anderson first. Okay, we talked about, what was the topic? The uniqueness and exceptionality of Black people, the hashtag #US2 movement, and his Pan-African agenda. Okay, so I interviewed Dr. Claude Anderson. Unfortunately, in the interview I did with Dr. Claude Anderson, he said that the U.S. Constitution said we were 3/5 of a human being. That's not true. That's not what it says. Then after that, I interviewed Dr. Paul Finkelman. Okay, and Dr. Paul Finkelman is the author of the book Thomas Jefferson and Slavery, Treason Against the Hopes of Mankind. He's the author of about 50 books. He was speaking at the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History that upcoming week. Okay. Hopefully this helps clear up a lot of misinformation and confusion. This is why we need to study history and study law. Some of the very people who were putting this misinformation out, saying the U.S. Constitution said we're 3/5 of a human being, Emancipation Proclamation, freedom, all this other, they're arguing for reparations. I'm all for reparations, but I'm for making legal arguments for reparations. You heard me talk about this before, like last week and week before. I'm all for making legal arguments for reparations, not moral arguments, legal arguments based upon law, especially based upon the U.S. Constitution, especially Article 1, Section 9, Clause 1 of the U.S. Constitution, which is why March 2nd, 1807, the U.S. Congress abolished the international transatlantic slave trade, which went into effect January 1st, 1808. Okay. But you have to understand history and law to argue based upon history and law. So when you go to lawmakers in Congress, you don't argue morality, you argue law. And largely that's not what's happening. Okay, let's move on. So that's on my YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, IMHOTEP. Name of that full clip, Dr. Claude Anderson, #US2 movement for Black people, Dr. Paul Finkelman, Thomas Jefferson and slavery. All right. Lastly, let's look at, this is actually part 6 of Joe Biden's 22-page agenda for African Americans. Many people said, we want a Black agenda, we want a Black agenda. He put one out. People didn't go read it. I don't know why. A lot of people have more time because they're at home due to COVID-19 and not at work. You can read all this at joebiden.com. Read his entire policy platform. Also read the article from blackpressusa.com. You've heard me talk about it before each week. Go back, watch the previous week's shows. We dealt his agendas in 6 parts. So each week I've broken down a different part of his agenda for African Americans that everybody said they wanted. Read the article from blackpressusa.com, Joe Biden's plan for empowering Black America. And this is Black Press USA is the National Newspaper Publishers Association. This is this is an African-American news wire, and it is an organization made up of the African-American newspaper publishers, the Black newspaper publishers. We have our own news wire, like Associated Press, AP, like Reuters. We have our own news wire. You see me post articles from Black Press USA. In this article here from May 5th, 2020, because that's when Biden's Lift Every Voice agenda, the Biden Plan for Black America. Some people make fun of the title. I focus on substance. Okay. Biden said the plan reflects many months of work and feedback from local elected officials, activists, organizations, practitioners, policy experts, strategists, and young people. His campaign called the plan a living document. In a news release, the campaign noted that Biden, quote, knows we need a comprehensive agenda for African Americans with an ambition that matches the scale of the challenge and with a recognition that race-neutral policies are not a sufficient response to race-based disparities, end quote. How many people you hear actually talk about that, dealing with his agenda? Okay. So go read this article here. We'll post a link. Let's get into part 6 of Biden's policies for the African-American community. Now, this is a living document. It's going to expand, but also when I deal with 6 principles of political self-defense, understanding how laws and policies impact the economic conditions of African-Americans, and I talk about how we need to understand the law better than they understand the law, so we understand how to disarm them of this weapon, use it against them, and protect ourselves as well. And when we look at candidates, whether it's president, city council, mayor, governor, we look at whose policies are most beneficial for African Americans, whose policies will do us the least amount of harm, whose policies have the most chance of actually becoming written in the law, who can create an environment for us to push our agenda the farthest and get the most accomplished, who will protect the gains that were made. Protecting gains that were made is something huge. 2016, we didn't understand that. If you read the document, Progress of the African American Community under the Obama administration, which is at whitehouse.gov, you hear me talk about it many times because I deal with facts and evidence, not beliefs and opinions. I'm a researcher. I'm not an opinion writer. If you want opinions, you have to go to somebody else. I deal with facts and evidence. Proper documentation ends all conversation. If we understood the policies that were put in place under the Obama administration that were beneficial to African Americans, we would have seen the need to protect those policies, and we would have identified Donald Trump as a threat, a clear and present danger to those policies. Many people didn't understand this, and when they asked African Americans, what the hell do you have to lose? As I've said before, the correct answer was everything. Go read that at whitehouse.gov. So I find it interesting that Trump talks about this little BS executive order that he signed dealing with policing, right? But he doesn't say that it was his administration that rolled back the policies that Obama administration put in place to dealing with policing, like the consent decree, like the investigations into the patterns and practices of police departments, or the policy that the Obama administration put in place dealing with military weapons and military equipment for police departments. It was Trump that reversed that. There was an article, we'll deal with this next week. I posted a couple articles early in the week that dealt with how Trump is just blatantly lying about the Obama administration didn't do anything dealing with policing. That's not true. And police unions supported Trump because they said he was going to take the shackles off of police officers, because there were restrictions put on policing from the Obama administration. Now, the majority of control over policing is at the local level, state and city. But there were things that the Obama administration put in place that Trump has reversed. This is why a lot of police unions supported Trump. And this is why a lot of them are supporting him now. Okay. But unfortunately, a lot of our people don't read. I'm just gonna be honest. Like, I listen to the BS a lot of people say. A lot of them don't read. So, okay. A lot of people listen to the wrong people. A lot of people listen to people on social media who are lying to our people to prop up their own social media platforms and sell them products and bullshit. I'm just gonna be honest with you. Because I can listen to people who, I can tell the difference between people who study politics and people who don't study politics. All right. So let's look at this. Part 6. Part 6 of Biden's plan agenda for the African-American community deals with environmental justice. Address environmental justice. Biden knows we cannot turn a blind eye to the way in which environmental burdens and benefits have been and will continue to be distributed unevenly along racial and socioeconomic lines, not just with respect to climate change, but also pollution of our air, water, and land. Now, you've heard me talk about before, if you look at the census report that comes out every September, there's a census report that comes out every September dealing with income and poverty. And the census report that came out in 2019, September 2019, talks about how there has been a deterioration in the quality of air over the past 3 years. A lot of that is tied into the fact that the Trump administration has reversed or weakened 100 policies dealing with the environment that the Obama administration put in place or either kept in place. New York Times has a big article dealing with this. Okay. But oftentimes, many people don't associate regulations dealing with the environment to African Americans. But when we deal with African Americans having bronchitis, having asthma, having all types of ailments and respiratory ailments, and a lot of that is triggered or negatively impacted by the environment, pollution and things like this, toxins, okay, in the environment. So the evidence of these disproportionate harms is clear. According to the Asthma and Allergy Foundation of America and the National Pharmaceutical Council, African Americans are almost 3 times more likely to die, from asthma-related causes than their white counterparts. People of color are more likely to live in areas most vulnerable to flooding and other climate change related weather events. Well, Donald Trump, when he was running for president and most of his tenure in office, has been a climate change denier. That negatively impacts African Americans. But if you don't understand how these policies and laws impact every aspect of our life, and politics is the legal distribution of scarce wealth, power, and resources, and the writing of laws, statutes, ordinances, amendments, and treaties, their adoption, interpretation, and enforcement, and politics impacts every aspect of our life, from the water we drink to the air we breathe to the food we eat, then you don't understand how all this impacts us on a daily basis. Impacts our health, impacts the air that we breathe, impacts how much money we have, impacts whether our business is going to succeed or fail, because it's estimated that 45 to 50% of African-American owned businesses are not going to survive this coronavirus economy. Elections have consequences. What the hell do you have to lose? The correct answer is everything. People of color are, especially African-Americans, are more likely to live in areas most vulnerable to flooding and other climate change related weather events. They are also less likely to have the funds to prepare for and recover from extreme weather, like a hurricane. In the wake of Hurricane Harvey, African American and Hispanic residents were twice as likely as non-Hispanic white individuals to report experiencing an income shock and lack of recovery support. Well, when you have someone incompetent in office who's in charge of FEMA, and they don't give the adequate support to those negatively impacted by a hurricane, that impacts your economic condition. That impacts your health. That impacts your future. As President Joe Biden will stand up to the abuse of power by polluters who disproportionately harm communities of color and low-income communities, he has asked his campaign to commence a process to more deeply engage with environmental justice leaders, and develop additional policies related to environmental justice. The policies to be announced in the weeks ahead will build on the proposals he has put forward to date. So they go through some bullet point headings here. Reinstate federal protections rolled back by the Trump administration that were designed to protect communities. Reinstate federal protections rolled back by the Trump administration that were designed to protect communities. Joe Biden will make it a priority for all agencies to engage in community-driven approaches to develop solutions for environmental injustices affecting communities of color, low income, and indigenous communities. You do know that Black Indians also, right? Hold polluters accountable. Hold polluters accountable. African American children living in poverty are more likely than wealthier white children to live in a community that borders toxic chemical facilities. Extreme weather can increase the health risk of being co-located with these toxic structures. Under the Trump administration, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, has referred the fewest number of criminal anti-pollution cases to the Justice Department in 30 years. Under the Trump administration, because we know Trump has rolled back a lot of these regulations to protect his corporate buddies. Okay, this is one of the reasons why they voted for him and they helped finance him, and we didn't see this coming because a lot of us don't understand how to perceive threats. Okay, a lot of people say, I don't like that B, referring to Hillary Clinton. This ain't about who you like. This is about understanding policies, laws, understanding how to perceive threats, and understanding whose policies are most beneficial for African Americans. Well, you have to read the policies first. So, reinstate federal protections rolled back by the Trump administration that were designed to protect communities. Hold polluters accountable. Under the Trump administration, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, which was created under the Richard Nixon administration, has referred the fewest number of criminal anti-pollution cases to the Justice Department in 30 years. I wonder why. Allowing corporations to continue to pollute, affecting the health and safety of both their workers and surrounding communities without consequences, perpetuates an egregious abuse of power. Trump, an abuse of power? No, come on, you gotta be kidding. Trump would abuse power? Really? Failure to reduce emissions disproportionately hurts African American and Hispanic residents who experience 37% higher exposure to nitrogen dioxide, a toxic pollutant, compared to non-Hispanic whites. Let me repeat this. Failure to reduce emissions disproportionately hurts African American and Hispanic residents who experience 37% higher exposure to nitrogen dioxide, which is a toxic pollutant, compared to non-Hispanic whites. This leads to an increased rate of premature death due to heart disease. I repeat, what the hell do you have to lose? Everything. This leads to an increased rate of premature death due to heart disease. As President Joe Biden will direct the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, and the Justice Department to pursue these cases to the fullest extent permitted by law, and when needed, seek additional legislation as needed to hold corporate executives personally accountable, including jail time where merited. Next bullet point, ensure access to safe drinking water for all communities. Joe Biden will make water infrastructure a top priority. For example, by establishing systems to monitor lead and other contaminants in our water supply and take necessary action to eliminate health risks, including holding polluters accountable and support communities in upgrading their systems. And so there are about 3,000 communities in the U.S. that have lead levels higher than Flint, Michigan in their water. In addition, Joe Biden will double federal investments in clean drinking water and water infrastructure and focus new funding on low-income rural, suburban, and urban areas that are struggling to replace pipes and treatment facilities, and especially on communities at high risk of lead or other kinds of contamination like Flint, Michigan. And 25% of African Americans live in rural America. Contrary to what Trump thinks, we don't all live in the inner city. 25% of African Americans live in rural America. In addition, Joe Biden will reduce the matching funds required of local governments that don't have the tax base to be able to afford borrowing to repair their water systems. Next bullet point, monitor for lead, FOR, monitor for lead and other contaminants and hold polluters accountable. Monitor for lead, contaminants, and hold polluters accountable. As President Joe Biden will also require state and local governments to monitor their water systems for lead and other contaminants and will hold and will provide them with the resources to do so. Biden will also work with the Environmental Protection Agency and the Justice Department to hold companies that pollute our waterways accountable, aggressively enforcing existing regulations and prosecuting any violations. Corporations and their executives cannot break the law and expect to get away with it. Next bullet point, prioritize communities harmed by climate change and pollution. Prioritize communities harmed by climate change and pollution. Low-income communities and communities of color don't equally share in the benefits of well-paying job opportunities that result from our clean energy economy. As President Joe Biden will make sure these communities receive preference in competitive grant programs. Okay, so we're talking about research, we're talking about money. Competitive grant preference in competitive grant programs in the clean economy revolution. In addition, Joe Biden will pursue new partnerships with community colleges, unions, and the private sector to develop programs to train all of America's workforce to tap into the growing clean energy economy, incorporate skills training into infrastructure investment planning by engaging state and local communities. So you're dealing with careers, you're dealing with jobs, you're dealing with employment, and reinvigorate and repurpose AmeriCorps for sustainability so that every American can participate in the clean energy economy. Participate in the clean energy economy. We also know the resiliency investments can raise. We also know that resiliency investments can raise property values and push lower income families out of neighborhoods. Climate change mitigation efforts must consciously protect low income communities from green gentrification. This negatively impacts African Americans, green gentrification. Okay, so read that's part 6 of Joe Biden's plan for Black America. It's 22-page agenda. Pages 2 through 11 deal with economic empowerment. We dealt with that in week 1. Go to joebiden.com. Joebiden.com. You can read it there. You can read all of his policies. I suggest you read all of his policies, including this agenda also. And then look at the article from New York Times. It's a big article. They update it periodically. And this deals with regulations. Let's see. This deals with environmental regulations from that the Trump administration has reversed. Let me see. What's the name of that article? Just a second. Let me get the name of that. It's from the New York Times. Originally it was 85 when they was tracking it. It was 85 policies or laws. Now it's 100. Trump administration is reversing 100 environmental rules. Here's the full list. It was last updated May 20th, 2020. The Trump administration is reversing 100 environmental rules. Here's the full list. All this stuff negatively impacts African Americans when you reverse environmental rules like that in general. Okay, so read that at NewYorkTimes.com. Also, we'll post the link here as well. All right. So, everybody, if you'd like this type of information, you can donate to the African History Network, $ the AHN Show through Cash App, $ the AHN Show through Cash App, also through PayPal, paypal.me/the AHN Show, paypal.me/the AHN Show. Read the article also from blackpressusa.com, Joe Biden's plan for empowering Black America. Watch Roland Martin Unfiltered, Monday through Friday, 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And about every 2 hours, he rebroadcasts the shows. We share the broadcast live here on our Facebook fan page, The African History Network, The African History Network. Okay. And we have to understand, as Dr. Leonard Jeffries and I were talking about when we deal with the pyramid principle, the foundation of the pyramid is African history and culture that gives us our VIPs, our values, our interests, and our principles. And that influences our economic empowerment and our political empowerment. We have to have a synthesis of all three of those, not just one. It's not just economics. It's not just starting a business. It's not just investing in the stock market, things like that. When we deal with your history and culture, also teaches you how to engage in economics. And one of the tools for that is the book by Dr. Jessica Gordon Nimhard, Collective Courage. You've heard me talk about it before. Collective Courage, A History of African-American Cooperative Economic Thought and Practice. The co-ops, the cooperatives, where the members are owners, that is a African principle that we brought to this country from Africa. So when we study this deals with our deep, rich history of cooperative economics, which is a different concept than European capitalism. A lot of us who went to business school, my degree is in business administration, but while I was in business school, I was also studying African history as well. And I was listening to Dr. Leonard Jeffries, and I graduated from Wayne State University in 1994. But I was studying Dr. Leonard Jeffries in the early 1990s. So I'm in business school and I'm reading Dr. Ben and Dr. John Henrik Clark and things like this. But so I'm studying, Dr. Jawaza Kanjufu, reading articles by Manning Marable, reading the column by Mumia Abu Jamal that was in the Michigan Citizen newspaper. At the same time, I'm in Wayne State's business school. So I'm learning African concepts and African history and studying Dr. Shankout the Job, things like this, and learning European business concepts. Okay. But this ties us deep into African history. All right. And I've interviewed Dr. Jessica Gordon Nimhard before. I need to interview her again. So when we deal with economic empowerment, we tap into our deep, rich history of cooperative economics, the co-ops. All right. So look, hey, we have to get out of here. Thanks for tuning in. Follow us on our Facebook fan page, The African History Network, The African History Network. Also, turn on notifications so you know when we go live. And then follow me on my YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, IMHOTEP. On YouTube, turn on notifications so you know when we go live there as well. We're on live Sundays, 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We broadcast on 9:10 a.m. the Superstation WFDF in Detroit. I do radio here in Detroit. Because of COVID-19 and Governor Gretchen Whitmer's stay-at-home order, the radio station owner and manager, they have us broadcasting from home. So soon I'll be back in the studio. And then we continue the discussion on my social media platforms. Okay. All right. So remember, at the African History Network, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world, because right now, let's correct wrong behavior. It's not over till we win. What you do for yourself, what you do to yourself, and what you allow other people to do to you and get away with is based upon what you think about yourself. What you think about yourself is based upon what you have been taught about yourself. What you've been taught about yourself is based upon everything you've read, heard, and seen about yourself. So when you control the radius of a man's thoughts, you can control the circumference of his actions, because the mind can't do or teach what it doesn't know. Right now, let's correct wrong behavior. It's not over till we win. Wakanda forever. We'll talk to you next time. Peace.